Hello, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleepy or Soft Landing into the slow, strange corners of the past. If you're here, you probably want something gentle, mildly informative, and just boring enough to help your brain drift off. You're in the right place. Tonight, we're headed to ancient Rome, but don't worry, no sword fights, no chariot races, no dramatic betrayals, just warm oil, bronze scrapers, and the peculiar ways Romans tried to stay clean, without ever using soap. You see, for all their aqueducts, philosophy, and military genius, the Romans had a bit of a hygiene quirk. They bathed daily, sometimes obsessively, but they didn't lather up. Instead, they rubbed themselves down with oil, then scraped it off with a curved blade. It sounds odd. It was, but it worked mostly. So go ahead and close your eyes, or not. Light a candle if you'd like, and imagine yourself stepping into a fire-warmed bathhouse. Sandal in one hand, strigil in the other, about to learn how an empire stayed clean with zero bubbles. How to stay clean in ancient Rome without soap. The empire's curious obsession with oil and scraping it is late morning in the Roman district of Tranquil, across the Tiber River from the bustling center of the city. The heat is rising already, curling in through the narrow alleyways and warming the red-tiled roofs. Beneath your sandaled feet, the stone roads radiate a dry kind of warmth that speaks of a long afternoon to come. But before the sun fully crests the sky, you have one task to complete: getting clean. You've been to the Thermae, the Roman public baths, before. Everyone has. These places aren't for the elite alone, they're for everyone. Rich, poor, merchant, soldier, baker, senator, slave, all share the same bath chambers, the same heat, the same clouds of steam, rolling through sun-dappled archways. But there's one peculiarity that still catches your modern sensibility by surprise. There is no soap, not a bar, not a bottle, not a single lathered, perfumed sliver in sight. Instead, there is oil, thick, warm, fragrant oil, sometimes mixed with crushed herbs, occasionally tinged with smoke, and always waiting to be applied to every inch of your skin. The bathers bring their own flasks, sometimes carved from ivory or horn, sometimes plain clay sealed with wax. Then once the oil is applied liberally, you reach for your most essential tool, the strigil. What exactly is a strigil? A strigil looks a bit like a blunt metal boomerang, curved and handleless. The best ones are made of polished bronze, but most are simple iron. The edge is not sharp, but it is firm. It's designed to glide over oiled skin and scrape off dirt, sweat, and dead cells in a single, satisfying pass. There is an art to it. Too fast and you miss the grime. Too slow and the oil begins to soak back in. It is a ritualized kind of cleaning. There is no rush, no splash of soap and scrub. Instead, you sit on a stone bench, oil warming on your arms, and scrape. Each stroke a deliberate erasure of the days where dust from the forum, smoke from the cook stalls, the sticky residue of too many hands and too little shade. The Romans believed in the therapeutic value of this process. Bathing was not just hygiene, it was balnea, a cure. The oils softened the skin, opened the pores, and allowed the body to breathe. The strigil, rather than being a tool of vanity, was considered a daily necessity. How a Roman bathhouse worked before you even saw a drop of water. There was a sequence to follow. First came the appetitorium, the changing room. You would disrobe and hand your garments to an attendant, often a slave assigned to guard clothing, and occasionally lose it anyway. Theft from the appetitorium was so common. Graffiti on the bathhouse walls often included threats or confessions. Secundus stole the tunic, may he be cursed with fleas. Then came the tepidarium, a warm room designed to help you begin sweating. It was the transition chamber, the place where your body began to adjust from the outdoor heat to the wet warmth of the inner baths. From there, you could enter the caldarium, the hot room, steam thick in the air, the floor heated from below by a hypocaust, a brilliant Roman system where hot air flowed beneath the stone floors and up through flue tiles in the walls. The temperature could soar well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, enough to loosen joints and fill lungs with damp heat. And only after the hot room would you move to the frigidarium, the cold plunge, a basin of cold water that shocked the skin and snapped you back to wakefulness. No part of this involved soap at any point, and often more than once you would oil your body and scrape yourself clean with the strigil. Some had their own attendants. Do it for them, the ellipses often trained masseurs who combined oiling, scraping, and muscle work into a luxurious service. Why didn't Romans use soap? The answer is partly cultural and partly practical. Soap did exist in the ancient world. It had been invented, more or less, by the Babylonians and later used in various forms by the Celts and Germanic tribes. These early soaps were harsh, made from animal fat and lye. They could clean, yes, but they also stripped oils from the skin and left it dry, something particularly unwelcome in Mediterranean climates where skin protection was valued. Romans associated the use of soap with barbaric tribes. To them, oil and scraping was cleaner, healthier, more refined. It exfoliated without abrasion, it softened without scent, and more importantly, it had been done for generations. Tradition was everything. Even Galen, the famed Roman physician of the 2nd century CE, wrote extensively on the health benefits of oil, massage, and strigil use, recommending different blends of oil for different ailments: pepper oil for chills, rose oil for calm, mustard oil for joints. Soap simply didn't fit into this highly stylized framework of health and balance. A scene from the baths. Let's imagine the moment. You sit beside a marble fountain shaped like a dolphin, oil flask in one hand, strigil in the other. Around you, conversation flows in lazy Latin, punctuated by laughter, argument, and the occasional snore from someone napping near the steam vents. You can smell lavender from someone else's oil, and maybe a faint tang of vinegar used to clean the floors. You scrape slowly, shoulder, arm, neck, then again. And as the oily grime gathers along the blade, you wipe it on a linen cloth and move on. Children splash in the shallow end of the frigidarium. A senator complains about grain prices. A freedman hums tunelessly as he oils his knees. Nothing about it is hurried. There is no pressure, no timed appointments, no sterile smell of antiseptic. Just warmth, breath, and the ancient, repetitive motions of a civilization removing its dust. Were they actually clean? This is the lingering question for any modern listener without soap. Were they really clean? Surprisingly, yes, at least by ancient standards. While the strigil didn't kill bacteria, it did remove most of the surface grime and dead skin. Combined with the heat of the caldarium and the cold plunge, it helped reduce body odor, improved circulation, and left the skin supple. And unlike the medieval period, where full-body bathing fell out of favor, the Romans bathed often daily if possible. Poorer citizens might have bathed less frequently due to cost, but free or cheap bath days sponsored by emperors ensured wide access. Cleanliness was civic, public, shared, which raises a curious thought. If cleanliness was a social ritual, was it more about health or belonging? How to stay clean in ancient Rome without soap. Strigils, status, and the bathhouse as a social stagove. Enter the caldarium now. The hot room. It's dim here, lit only by high windows that let in slanted beams of late morning sun, and by the flicker of oil lamps mounted in iron brackets along the wall. You can barely see through the steam. It hovers like a veil above the tiled floor, clinging to your skin the moment you step in. Somewhere to your left, a heavy-bodied man groans in relief as he sinks into a pool. Someone else is humming. Two boys are laughing too loudly, but no one tells them to hush. The bath is not a temple. It's more like a tavern with fewer clothes and more condensation. You pass a row of benches and sit on a warm slab. The stone is smooth from generations of bodies resting here before you. You take out your strigil. It's a simple thing, bronze curved, a little nicked on the edge. The handle is wrapped in worn leather. The blade still holds the shape of your arm, your chest, your back. You've used it for years, and yet even now, there's a small feeling of self-consciousness. Because in the bathhouse, you are always being seen. The bathhouse as theater in ancient Rome. The baths were not just for cleaning, they were social arenas, civic stages, status displays. They were the places where senators might run into poets, where fishmongers chatted with philosophers, where slaves and masters could sit shoulder to shoulder in the same steam, if only for a short while. And though the baths were public, they were also deeply stratified by subtle cues. The quality of your oil said a lot about your standing. Imported oil from Hispania or Cyrene was prized. The poor often had to make do with rancid, fat or leftover cooking grease. Your strigil could be plain iron or etched silver. Wealthy bathers even had slaves to oil and scrape them, making a public point of not lifting a finger. Your body itself muscular, soft, pale, bronze dwarfs, always under quiet scrutiny. Not in a modern way, but in the way that the Romans believed. The body reflected virtue, control, and most the old customs. Even your bathing schedule said something. The rich could bathe midday, when the bathhouse was quiet. The working classes waited until late afternoon, when the water was cloudy, and the benches slick with a day's sweat. So yes, you were being watched. Not judged exactly, but measured. Which made oiling and scraping more than hygiene. It was performance. The ellipse, personal groomers of the elliptive. You were wealthy or simply wished to look like you were, you might arrive at the bathhouse with a personal elliptis. These were trained attendants, often enslaved but sometimes free men, whose job it was to prepare you for the bath. They carried your oils, warmed your towels, massaged your muscles, and, most importantly, handled the strigil work. A good ellipse was something between a barber, masseur, and valet. He knew where your shoulders were tight, where your skin was rough, which oils soothed your joints. He might hum while he worked, or gossip softly, or simply move in silence, scraping the sweat and oil from your chest with practiced rhythm. There was even a market for these men. Some bathhouses were known for their skilled ellipses. A few became so well regarded they earned money on the side for private clients. For the Roman elite, this wasn't indulgence, it was a statement to appear in public, gleaming and well-oiled, with skin smooth and limbs limber, was to say, I have the time and money to care for myself. I am part of the civil world. Where did the oil go? Now here's a detail you might not have thought about. When you scrape oil off your body, especially if you've spent an hour sweating in a heated chamber, it doesn't vanish. It forms a grimy grayish paste, a mix of sweat, skin, dirt, and oil known politely as strigmentum. So what did the Romans do with it? The answer is both practical and slightly unsettling. They collected it. Bathhouse. Attendants were responsible for cleaning the floors and benches, wiping down strigils, and sometimes even harvesting the strigmentum from wealthy patrons. It was stored in jars, often near the changing rooms or behind the service counters, and then, believe it or not, it was sold. That's right. This oily gunk scraped from human bodies was resold for various purposes, as a base for medicinal salves especially, for bruises or swelling. Some believed the body's own oils held curative powers, as an ingredient in animal treatments, particularly for skin irritations in livestock, and occasionally, though rarely, as an ingredient in cosmetics. Mixed with fragrant oils to mask the smell, so the next time you feel uncomfortable at your local gym's lost and found box. Remember, the Romans literally monetized their body gunk. Bathhouse graffiti. Voices from the steam. If you walk through the ruins of Pompeii today, you'll find bathhouse walls covered with graffiti, scratched into plaster by bored bathers or cheeky servants. These weren't official inscriptions, they were snippets of life. Secundus to Thyophilae. I waited in the caldarium, you never came. Beware. The slipper near the third step. Marcus fell and cried out like a goat. Lucius is strong, but he smells like garlic in the hot room. Some were poems, others were complaints. A few were obscene, but all of them speak to the same truth, that the bathhouse, for all its elegance, was a noisy living place, filled with laughter, flirtation, competition, boredom, comfort. It wasn't just about getting clean, it was about being seen in all the messy, sweaty, contradictory glory of Roman daily life. And what of the women? You might be wondering, where were the women during all of this? The answer is, it depends. In some cities, men and women bathed at different times of day. In others, they used separate facilities. And in some places, particularly under the earlier empire, mixed bathing was not uncommon until later emperors, such as Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius, issued edicts discouraging the practice. Women used the same oiling and scraping techniques, but their bath routines often emphasized socializing and grooming. Hairdressers were sometimes present in the apodyterium. Midwives occasionally set up shop in quiet corners. Female bathhouse vendors sold sponges, perfumes, and cosmetics. And of course, the ritual of bathing oil, scrape, soak, cold plunge remained the same, a shared rhythm, a mirror of the city's own pulse. The end of a typical visit entry, you step out of the caldarium. Your skin is pink from heat, slightly tender from scraping, and fragrant with thyme oil. You pass through the frigidarium, plunging briefly into cold water to close your pores. A sharp, delicious shock, you towel off with a piece of linen or wool, and return to the apodyterium. Your garments are waiting folded if you're lucky, and still slightly warm from the nearby hypercost system. You leave the bathhouse slower than you entered, your limbs looser, your chest lighter, your face glistening with a thin sheen of leftover oil. Outside, the streets are louder now. The forum is crowded. A procession is forming near the temple steps. Bakers shout about bread prices. A boy sells figs from a basket. And you, like so many others, return to the city just a little more civil, more presentable, more Roman. But this begs a curious question. If everyone performed this ritual every day for generations, what happened when the baths fell silent? Would you like to continue to section 3 of story 1? How to stay clean in ancient Rome without soap. It's a century later. The strigil you once used daily now sits forgotten at the back of a villa drawer. The bathhouse where you shared jokes and steam with neighbors stands in eerie quiet. Its tiled floors are still warm to the touch in the late afternoon sun, but no footsteps echo there anymore. The bronze taps have turned green. The plaster is flaking. Someone scratched a prayer into the caldarian wall, then never returned. So, what happened? How did the Roman world so committed to its ritual of oiling, scraping, and soaking lose interest in its greatest civic invention? The answer, like so many in history, is gradually and then all at once a slow unraveling of infrastructure. Public baths didn't vanish in a single moment, but cracks began to show as the empire weakened. By the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, the Roman economy was straining under inflation, political instability, and external pressures from migrating and invading groups. Maintaining massive complexes of plumbing, hypercosts, tiled pools, and staff was expensive. Bathhouses were funded by public money, wealthy patrons, or the emperor himself, but as funds dried up and priorities shifted toward military defense, maintenance became patchy. Aqueducts, those beautiful stone bridges that carried water over mountains and valleys, were often the first to suffer. Sabotaged in times of siege, or left unrepaired during civil unrest, they reduced water flow into the cities. Without a consistent source of water, bathhouses couldn't function. Tepidariums grew cold, caldaria ran dry, pools grew stagnant, or worse, reused. The pipes themselves, made from lead, corroded or became clogged. Without steady upkeep and trained slaves or freedmen to manage them, the ingenious Roman plumbing system began to fail. Bit by bit, the bathhouses stopped humming. Changing religious attitudes, there was another shift happening, less visible, but just as profound. As Christianity spread through the empire and gradually became the state religion, Attitudes toward the body, nudity, and public display began to evolve. Early Christians didn't immediately oppose bathing. In fact, many saw cleanliness as next to spiritual purity. But over time, the bathhouses, particularly their open social mixing and nudity, were increasingly seen as morally ambiguous spaces. Bishops wrote treatises condemning the frivolity of gossip in the steam rooms, or the indecency of mixed sex bathing. There's even a tale of Saint Benedict avoiding bathhouses entirely in favor of cold, solitary washing, preferring humility and discipline to the steamy indulgence of civic bathing. Bit by bit, cleanliness shifted from a civic performance to a private virtue. The strigil became a relic. Oil gave way to cloth. And eventually, as soap entered more regular use, a new way of washing emerged. Enter soap. Finally, yes, soap does finally arrive. Its earliest forms existed for centuries, used by barbarian tribes like the Gauls and Germans. Made from animal fat and wood ash, early soap was often soft, grayish, and harsh. The Romans considered it a foreign novelty at best, but by the 5th and 6th centuries CE, as trade patterns shifted and the Western Roman Empire fractured, the influence of these northern cultures began to grow. Soap-making techniques improved, recipes softened, perfumes were added. Olive oil, used once for scraping, was repurposed into Castile soap, a hard white soap that could both cleanse and scent. Ironically, as the great bathhouses of Rome fell into ruin, personal cleanliness became more portable, private, and sudsy.no. More scraping, just a bar in the hand and a cloth to scrub. The strigil was out, the soap was in. What remained behind even, as bathhouses declined, their echoes lingered. Ruins remain, some still do, tucked beneath cities like Rome, Bath, and Istanbul. Pipes still snake beneath modern streets. Inscriptions still warn Bath not to spit in the pool. The outlines of hypocaust columns still cast shadows across cracked tile floors. Archaeologists found discarded strigils in old changing rooms. Bent, worn, broken, left behind by bathers who never returned. A few are ornate with the names of their owners. One reads, "For Marcus, on his 23rd birthday, may his skin be smooth and his words kind." Even in decline, the bathhouses left their mark on the language we still take a bath. On the architecture, many European spas revived the Roman style, and on the collective memory of cleanliness as both necessity and ritual. A quiet, final bath, imagine if you will. The final bathhouse still operating somewhere in Gaul or northern Italy in the early 6th century. It's dusk. The lamps have been lit. There are only a handful of visitors, no older men perhaps, or those two, stubborn to give up the old ways. The caldarium is lukewarm. The hypocaust only faintly working. Steam isn't what it used to be. One man sits with his back to the wall, scraping gently with a bronze strigil worn thin as paper. The oil he brought was older than it should be, a little sour smelling. His robe lies folded beside him. He doesn't speak. There's no crowd to impress. Outside, the sounds of hooves and hammering drift through the fading daylight. The world is changing. The empire is no longer what it was. But inside, for a few more minutes, he is clean, oiled, scraped, Roman dot, and when he finishes he will towel off, dress slowly, and walk home past the statue of Augustus, now one hand missing. The streets are emptier these days, but the ritual remains. For now. What does this mean for us? In some ways, the Roman bath is an emblem of lost rituals, practices that once bound communities together, now replaced by quieter, more efficient, more private routines. We shower alone, we soap up with fancy fragrances, we scrub and rinse in tiled cells with hot water on command. It's cleaner, quicker, arguably better. But perhaps something was lost too, the slowness of bathing, the intentionality, the conversation, and yes, even the quiet satisfaction of a bronze strigil gliding across warm skin. So now you might wonder, if the Romans had embraced soap-scented bubbling mass-produced, would the bathhouse have survived? Or was its decline never about hygiene, but the fading of a way of life altogether? The slave who scraped senators' strigils and statesay, day in the life of an Alaptesti son, has not yet fully cleared the rooftops of the Palatine Hill. But already you are awake, not because you wish to be, but because you're master the senator. With the crooked walk and expensive breath, likes to bathe early, you are an ellipsa-trained slave attendant who oils, massages, and scrapes the skin of Roman nobles in the public baths. You are not famous, you are not free, but among the other bathhouse workers, your name is spoken with a mix of respect and weary envy, because you are skilled. Your hands know how to find muscle knots behind the shoulder blade. You can prepare 6 oil blends from memory. You know the temperature of water just by the sound of it pouring, and you never, ever, leave a streak of strigmentum behind the knee. This is your art, and like all Roman arts it comes with hierarchy, humiliation, and heavy lifting. Waking, walking, waiting your day begins before dawn. In the small servants' quarters behind the balneum privatema, private bath suite, used by your master and his peers. Though most Romans use the thermae or public bathhouses, the very wealthy prefer their own heated rooms, their own polished benches, and attendants like you. You dress in a simple tunic, pull on sandals so worn you can see the shape of your toes in them, and collect your tools. Strigils, bronze and polished, 3 small flasks of oil, olive roses infused in vinegar scented, a folded wool towelette. Thin blade for trimming calluses, though this is frowned upon in polite company. You light the oil lamp near the hypocaust vents. The warmth hums faintly through the stone floor. Soon it will be loud with footfalls and voices, but for now, it is just you and the distant splash of someone testing the water depth. He arrives, your master arrives with 2 guests, swarthy, tie-dyed, one still half drunk from the night before. They speak in low voices. You do not make contact unless spoken to. One gestures at you with his chin. Does he know the cut behind the knee? My last man left me with a rash. Your master smirks. He knows every line of a senator's leg better than I know my wife's temple veil. You bow, of course, not in gratitude, but to hide the flare of heat in your cheeks. You have heard this kind of joke before. It is not the last time today that someone will speak of your hands as if they do not belong to you. Oiling the body, not the ego. The men undress. Their bodies are soft, like plump fish pressed into tunics. They stretch, groan, and complain with the Senate, about the weather, about a local baker who overcharged for figs. You do not speak unless asked. Instead, you step forward with your flask. The oil is warmed, thick, golden in the lamplight. You pour it into your palm, rub your hands once, and begin, across the shoulders first, then the arms, then the ribs. Your touch is firm but careful. You are not here to pleasure, nor to pamper. You are here to prepare the skin for scraping, to draw out heat. Soften the dermis, raise the sweat just below the surface. The room is warm now. Steam rises gently from the stone floor. One of the guests jokes about his wife's breath smelling like wet clay. No one laughs. You keep working. You press your thumbs into a tight muscle just above the spine. The man hisses. Careful, he bites. You step back, you nod. You scrape your hands on a cloth and wait. The scraping begins. It is time. You take up the strigil. Its edge is curved to match the rib cage. You tested it earlier with your thumb to make sure there were no burrs. Even a small rough patch can raise welts. The first scrape is always slow. Across the back, where sweat has pooled, oil has gathered, and the skin is reddening from heat. The blade moves in one fluid motion from shoulder to waist gap, a trail of grayish residue. You wipe the strigil on a towel. Repeat dot again, dot and again. The men talk over your head. One scratches himself absently. Another belches. Your master says something crude about his cousin's new house slave. You are not here. You are hands only. The strigmentum jar, you deposit the scraped residue strigmentum into a clay jar. The same jar used each morning. It's about half full. By now no one talks about it, but you know that your master sells it quietly to an apothecary near the temple of Casta. The apothecary mixes it with vinegar and fig syrup to make a salve for bruises. Some say gladiators use it. Others say women buy it to smear on their cheeks as blush. You find both stories equally strange, and yet it sells. In a world where every bodily product has a price, even the sweat scraped from a senator's thigh can earn a coin. Moments of quiet sometimes. When the bath is at its hottest, the conversation dies. The men stop talking. The air grows thick. The flicker of the oil lamps is the only sound, aside from the drip of water off the walls. In those moments, as you scrape a forearm or press your knuckle into a shoulder blade, you almost forget. Forget your station. Forget the insults. Forget that the oil is not yours. The tools are not yours. The craft is not yours. Because in that moment, your work is precise. It is meaningful, and though no one will thank you, you are the reason they will leave this room smooth, fragrant, and admired. But you might wonder, what happens to a skilled ellipse when he is freed? Could he open his own bathhouse, or does the scent of oil always remind others of his chains? It happens quietly. No ceremony, no silver coin placed in your hand. Just a word, spoken after a bath between 2 sips of honeyed wine. You've served me well. You're manumitted now. Take the proper papers from my steward, and don't embarrass me. And just like that, you are no longer a slave. You are a freedman now, libertus, a man with a name, some rights, and an uncertain future. But freedom in Rome is not the clean break it sounds like. It is full of echoes. Your old master will still be called your patronus, your patron. You are still expected to serve him when summoned. You will still call him dominus in formal settings, but you can earn wages now. You can own property, you can marry. If you save enough, your children may one day be born free citizens with no obligations, and maybe, just maybe, you can start your own bath service. Finding a corner in the Subaratha. Subora is not beautiful. It is crowded, noisy, smoky, and occasionally dangerous after dark. But for freedmen like you, it's where ambition lives. You rent a stall near a small bathhouse, a narrow room with flaking plaster and a cracked oil basin. The owner, a rough-voiced woman named Petronia, allows you to set up your own massage mat and offer services to bathers who can't afford their own ellipse. You hang a small wooden sign. Oil scraping -1 as per session. Gentle hands. No gossip. The first few days, no one comes. Then a bricklayer tries you out. He returns the next day with his cousin. Then to merchants. then a retired soldier with scarred knees who pays you extra to massage his calves. You never advertise beyond the sign. You don't need to. Your hands speak for you, but freedom has its limits, you notice. Though that not everyone treats you the same. Some still call you service slavian after you correct them. Others won't let you touch them once they learn. You were once owned. One man spits on the floor near your mat and mutters that the subura is rotting with freed scum. You feel the weight of your past in every pause, every stare. There is no uniform for a freedman, no badge to say I am respectable now. Only your hands, your skill, and the coins you gather each week in a small cloth pouch you keep under your cot. Sometimes senators you once oiled pass by. They don't recognize you, or they pretend not to. You're not sure which stings more. The return of the strigil. You have bought your own strigil now, not the one you used as a slave. That one was property. This one is yours. It is not bronze, it is tin. Slightly rougher. The edge needs sharpening more often, but you carry it in a leather pouch. You stitched yourself that is curved perfectly to the shape of the lower back. Balanced in the hand, it even makes a quiet musical scrape when drawn across oiled skin. Learn the backs of the city's poor. Their scars, their sunburns, the hard pads where muscles have tightened from labor. You blend your own oils, olive with wormwood for aches, rose with poppy for sleeplessness, garlic with vinegar for those who feared the plague. And slowly, quietly, your name spreads. Not just as a former slave, but as a man who knows how to make someone feel whole again. A new kind of client. One day, a young man comes to your mat. He is well dressed but quiet. He lies down without asking questions, only says, "My shoulder won't lift properly." You begin the oiling. He hisses as you find the knot near his neck. Then he says, "That's the one." You nod. Scrape, wipe the strigil. "My father wouldn't come here," he says after a long pause. He says, "This place smells like fried onions and ambition." You smile. "It smells like sweat and rosemary." You say, "Fried ambition costs extra." He laughs. He returns a week later. Then again, eventually he brings his father. You scrape his father's back in silence. He does not speak, but when he leaves a full denarius on the mat. You don't spend it. You keep it in a small dish, just to look at. The notice on the wall. One morning, you arrive to find a notice plastered outside the Bathhouse that it announces a new regulation. All licensed attendants must register with the curator aquarium, the official in charge of rooms, water and bathing affairs. It's a formality, but it means you must declare your name, your background, your trade. You walk to the office with your parchment, your pouch of coins and your best tunic. You write your name. The scribe glances up. "Formerly a slave," he asks. You nod. He marks a small circle beside your entry. You don't ask what it means. You already know. Yet still, you wonder, can a man whose hands once served power ever truly be seen as more than a servant heaven, when those same hands build his future from the calluses up? Oil, memory, and the weight of work. 1,750 years have passed. The bathhouse near the Subura has changed hands twice. The roof leaks in winter. A cracked tile in the caldarium floor has grown into a small, permanent puddle that everyone steps around without thinking. But you are still here. Not every day now. Your joints ache more than they used to. Your hands don't close into fists so easily anymore. You sit behind your mat and instruct a younger man, Sextus, the son of a butcher, on how to blend oils, how to read a shoulder's stiffness, how to scrape gently but firmly, without offense. He listens. That's rare enough to make you hopeful. You haven't oiled a senator in a long time, but you don't need to. Your name on the wall. One morning, the clerk arrives with a new wall notice. The city intends to tax all independent bath attendants. A registry is being created. Licensed workers will be given stamped tokens to hang at their stall. He asks your name. You tell him. He pauses. You're the one from Petronia's house, the old Aleps. You nod. He writes carefully. They say you could unstick a soldier's shoulder without a word. You don't reply, but the comment stays with you longer than it should. That afternoon, you sit on your stool and look at your strigil. It's the same one. The tin blade. The smooth curve, the dull gleam. You've sanded it so many times over the years that it no longer scrapes, it glides. You rub a thumb along its edge, and for a moment, you remember what it felt like to be used by it, rather than to use it. An unexpected visit one afternoon. A figure arrives at your stall, older, still wrapped in the kind of layered wool that costs more than a year of oil. You know him. You oiled his feet once, when you were a slave. He had complained about the heat of the water and the sting of his sandals. He never remembered your name. He stands above you, looking uncertain. You still do scraping. You nod only if asked. He frowns, removes his outer cloak, sits with more difficulty than he wants you to see. You pour the oil. He flinches at the cold. "I was told you're good with the spine." You smile faintly. "I've spent a lifetime on spines." He does not ask your name, but when you begin scraping, he does not flinch, and when it's done, he stands slowly, places 2 coins in your palm, and says, "You should have a real shop." You look up at him. "This is a real shop." He nods once, walks away. You do not watch him go, the shape of a life some nights. You dream of baths long gone, the high ceilings of the public thermi, the pillars veiled in steam, the laughter echoing off marble, the heat of the hypocaust humming beneath your sandals, the scrape of your blade across the skin of a merchant, a baker, a magistrate. All memories are good, but most are quiet. That's what you've come to value. Not glory, not recognition, just quiet, practiced dignity. You've taught for young men the craft. One went to Ostia, another works in the army camps. Sextus now runs the store when you're not there. Sometimes he forgets to wash the cloth between clients. You scold him for that, but gently. What you leave behind you do not write. Books you do not have a family crest or a tomb lined in gold, but you've left your mark in olive oil and soot, in muscle memory, in the bent wrists of every man you train. In the city that once knew you only as a shadow behind a senator's back. Some now call you master of the strigil. You chuckle at that. It's absurd. But kind. And when you die someday, not too soon, you suspect your tools will outlast you. Someone will inherit your blade, and perhaps, just perhaps, they will carry it with the same care you did. So now you might ask, in a world obsessed with titles, ranks, and speeches, is there any legacy more Roman than mastering a quiet, invisible craft and passing it on? Bread, beans, and the business of bathhouse bites. 1,750 words. You have stepped out of the caldera, pink-skinned and drowsy. Your hair is still damp. Your limbs feel boneless. The air outside the hot room strikes your face like a cold rag, and you welcome it. But now, you're hungry. You don't want a feast, just something small. A handful of olives, a fig or two, maybe some chickpeas still warm in the pot, and a cup of watered wine with a slice of citrus floating at the top. You follow the scent. It curls around the doorway from a low arch at the side of the bath. Complex, a place humming with voices, oil-slicked lamps, and the soft sound of chewing. A popina. Welcome to the snack counter, not just a bath a whole afternoon, eh? Roman bathhouse visit wasn't quick. This wasn't a 15-minute shower on your way to work. It was a social commitment, often lasting several hours. You bathed, you scraped, you soaked, you strolled the colonnade, you debated politics, you played dice, you ate, and bathhouses knew this. That's why most larger complexes, especially those in Rome, Ostia, Carthage, and Ephesus, included food vendors, inside or immediately adjacent to the bathing spaces. Some were proper taverns. Others were no more than a marble-topped counter with a steaming pot and a row of jugs behind it. The air always smelled like smoke, oil, garlic, and roasted barley, and the sound always voices, always clinking. The bathhouse may have been for cleanliness, but the snack store was for comfort. What did they serve? Let's take a moment to browse the menu such as it was. The typical popina attached to a bathhouse didn't serve full meals. It offered ready-to-eat small bites, often hot and salty, ideal for people who had just sweat out half their body's moisture and weren't ready to sit down to a banquet. Here are the favorites. Pulls, a porridge of barley or emmer wheat, sometimes enriched with honey or herbs, served warm, like Roman oatmeal. Fava beans or chickpeas, roasted in olive oil and salt, crunchy, protein-packed and cheap. Stuffed dates, often filled with nuts or cheese, or fried in honey. Olives, sometimes soaked in wine or vinegar, sometimes rolled in herbs. Flatbreads with garum fermented fish sauce, or dipped into oil and black pepper. Sausage slices, often made with offcuts and spiced with cumin, coriander, or garlic. These were served hot, cut into discs on a little board. Hard-boiled eggs, often served with a sprinkle of ground lovage or fish brine, and of course mulsum, a mix of wine and honey, usually watered down. Served at room temperature in little clay cups. Everything was finger food. You wiped your hands on cloth or straw. Napkins weren't standard. Plates were rare. If you dropped something, you did not pick it up. Not unless you wanted to join the dogs who ran these places. Most bathhouse food counters were leased out to vendors, often women, freedmen, or families of artisans who couldn't afford a shop on the main street. They worked long hours in tight spaces. Hot oil, boiling beans, screaming boys asking for more cheese. Occasionally a senator demanding cold wine in a place that didn't have a cellar. But there was opportunity here, especially if your stall became known for something special. Crisp lupins, say, or lightly spiced lentils. In Pompeii, archaeologists have uncovered thermopolia fast food counters with decorated fronts, built-in dolia sunken clay jars for storing hot food, and even graffiti reviews etched into the wall. One simply reads, "Lucius serves the hottest beans in town." Also, don't trust Gaius with dice. Public praise and public warning. Bathing and bloating, a delicate dance, of course. There was some debate about whether it was best to eat before or after bathing. Celsus, the Roman medical writer, advised light food before a bath and more substantial meals after. But many ignored this advice because who wants to bathe on an empty stomach? Still, overindulgence had consequences. More than one poor soul fell asleep in the caldarium after a belly full of fried lentils and had to be carried out, groaning and gasping, by concerned strangers. And there were rules, too. Most bathhouses had signs or attendants forbidding food inside. The heated chambers. Crumbs attract rats. figs attract flies, and no one wants sausage grease on the stone benches, so the rule was bathe first, then eat. Or eat first and expect to sweat vinegar. Not just nourishment. Networking food near the baths wasn't just for the body, it was for the business of conversation. Senators might chat over honeyed almonds. Courtesans flirted with patrons over moss, and poets argued about meter while chewing barley cakes. Political deals were whispered between bites of egg and leaked on, in fact. Some bathhouses were unofficial offices for the city's daily business. The food vendor became a kind of middleman, serving snacks, passing messages, supplying wine for delicate discussions. And when someone got too loud, too drunk, or too handsy, the vendor would bang a ladle against the dolium and shout, "Take it outside, not near the beans." So now you might wonder if bathing was for cleansing and oiling. But the snack counter became the true heart of the bathhouse. Where exactly did Roman leisure begin and hygiene end? Snack culture and the politics of public eating. 1,750 words. Imagine the scene. You're standing at the edge of the public bathhouse in 2nd century Rome. You're clean, you're pink from the steam, and you're wrapped loosely in your post-bath tunic still. Slightly damp around the collar, you lean on a wooden pillar. Across from you, next to a glowing clay stove and a row of oily jugs, sits an older woman slicing sausage onto a shared platter. Her hands are practiced. Her face is unreadable. She doesn't speak unless necessary. You nod. She nods back. She hands you a plate. This moment, brief, quiet, and mostly unspectacular, is a form of public ritual. It's not just about food, it's about participation. The role of the Pepina Matrono bathhouse snack vendors were often run by matro and popinary older women who acted as food sellers, gossip keepers, and unofficial referees. They were not noblewomen, they were not slaves. Often they were freedwomen, former house servants, widows, or ex-performers who had saved enough to rent a stall. They didn't smile unless they meant it. Their job was equal parts cook, money handler, and cultural barometer. If someone started a fight, the Pepina matron banged a spoon. If a bathhouse poet got too bold with his metaphors, she raised an eyebrow. If a boy tried to skip the bill, she remembered his mother's name and muttered, "It just loud enough to eat at her stall was to enter her space." And that came with unspoken rules. Don't insult the food. Don't lean too far over the beans. Don't flirt with her daughter unless you can read and write what you could learn from a snack. Stall. These bathhouse counters weren't just about sustenance. They were places where news traveled fast. In the absence of newspapers or official announcements, the gossip networks of Popine were invaluable. Here, you'd hear whether the grain ships from Egypt had docked yet, who was caught cheating in dice games, what diseases were moving through which neighborhoods, which general's son was spotted at the temple of Isis with the wrong woman. People listened, not just bathers, magistrates, scribes, even the occasional spy. There's evidence that some food stalls were monitored by local officials to pick up on brewing, unrest, or overhear political dissatisfaction. But most of the time, the chatter stayed harmless, repetitive, familiar, like the smell of roasting chickpeas, comforting, even when it lingered. Class, food, and where you ate. Public eating was not neutral in Rome. Rich citizens often avoided being seen eating with their hands in public unless they were slumming it for fun. They might nibble on a fig or sip some honeyed wine, but crouching near a bean cart was a statement, a political one even. For plebeians, laborers, and the poor, these counters were a godsend. Cheap, fast, satisfying. You didn't need a kitchen. At home, you didn't need fuel, or pots, or spices. The vendor had already done the work in this way. Bathhouse snack stalls became the great class equalizer, if only for a moment. You might sit beside a man in better sandals, but you both chewed the same olives. You both wiped your hands on the same straw mats. You both ignored the same pigeon eyeing your sausage. And for a few oily, salt-crusted minutes you belonged. Popine and respectability, of course. Not everyone approved. Moralists like Seneca and Juvenal grumbled about the decay of Roman values, and often used food stalls, especially those near baths, as shorthand for decadence, laziness, or urban corruption. They described patrons with mouths full of lentils making vulgar jokes, and idle young men sipping wine at noon while Rome's virtues slipped down the drain. One satirical poem describes a bathhouse snack vendor charging a client extra for bread too warm to touch and wine that spoke Latin badly, but for the average Roman these criticisms rang hollow. People needed to eat, and sometimes a hot bowl of spiced peas, served after a long, oily soak, was worth more than all the rhetoric in the forum. The remains in the dirt when Pompeii was excavated. Archaeologists found food stalls near bath complexes littered with olive pits, chickpea husks, cracked eggshells, charred bread crusts, animal bones, likely sausage remnants, and cups, hundreds of them thrown aside, once emptied of malsum or sour wine. These remains told a story of routine, not luxury, of mouths filled and hunger answered, of the clatter and chew of everyday lives, lived around warmth, salt and oil. Don't know monuments were built to these snack sellers. No statues, no coins, but in the grooves worn into the stone counters where elbows leaned and coin purses rested there, the story endures. So now you might ask, in a civilization known for conquest, oratory, and empire, why does its truest voice echo from the low, smoky corner where someone served beans to a tired man in a damp tunic? Steam, salt, and the memory of ordinary things. 1,750 words let say it's late afternoon now. The sunlight cuts sideways across the street outside the bathhouse, catching the edges of ceramic jugs and worn sandals. You've already bathed. You're sitting at the counter, fingertips oily, stomach humming with contentment. Around you, others do the same, eating slowly, leaning into the quiet that only follows long warmth and conversation. Someone laughs in the background. A ladle clangs, a fig splits in half under someone's teeth. It's nothing extraordinary. And that's precisely why it matters, because this, the ritual of post-bath eating, the oil still clinging to your forearms, the garlic on your breath, the soft ache in your back, this is the stuff Roman life was actually made of. Not conquests, not orations, not law codes etched into marble, but salted beans and steam, shared in a room full of strangers who have also just been scraped, soaked and softened by heat. The taste of routine food historians often focus on Roman banquets, golden platters, peacock tongues, wine poured from dolphin-shaped jugs, but that was theater dog. The real diet of the average Roman rich or poor was defined by repetition. Lentils, porridge, bread, figs, oil. The seasoning changed, the hands that served it changed. But the core didn't end the bathhouse snack counter. It wasn't just a convenience, it was a culinary anchor, a daily checkpoint, a spot where people could be fed without fuss. The same vendor might serve you from adolescence into old age. She would remember your preference for olives over garlic, or how you didn't like your barley too wet. She might never know your name, but she'd call you Fig Boy or Quiet Mouth, or that one who coughs when the vinegar's sharp, and you'd keep returning, because familiar food is a kind of home, even when you have no roof of your own. Thermopolia and modern fast food. Sometimes scholars call these ancient snack counters the original fast food, but that's not quite right. Yes, the food was quick. Yes, it was salty and satisfying, but it wasn't mass-produced. It wasn't wrapped in paper. There were no queues of carts identical across cities. Each stall was its own little world, defined by its cook's temperament, the heat of its fire, the seasoning of its beans. In a way, these stalls were more like neighborhood diners or corner cafes, somewhere between private and public, somewhere you could exist without explaining yourself. And in Rome, where identity was often tangled in class, dress, and accent, that kind of anonymity, the freedom to simply chew, was priceless. Children, crumbs, and continuity. Once uncovered a pepina store where the floor beneath the counter had been repaired with crushed roof tiles and flattened amphora shards, a patchwork solution to a leak. What made the patch so special wasn't its materials, but what was found, embedded in the dried filler clay, olive pits, a child's bronze ring, a broken game die, and 2 charred barley grains. Together, these objects told a quiet story. A boy eating while playing dice, then dropping his ring. A cook stirring beans too close to the flame. A customer chewing olives while waiting for the water in the caldarium to reach the perfect heat. Moments nobody recorded, but the floor remembered. Ghosts of the counter today. The ancient thermopolia sit in ruins, low stone shells, sunken jars filled with dust, counters that no longer smell like vinegar and cumin. Tourists pass by them quickly. There are bigger things to see. Temples, forums, gladiator bones. But if you imagine the scent of roasted chickpeas in the air, the hum of conversation, the scrape of a wooden stool, you begin to feel it. The warmth still lingers because history isn't only in battles and emperors. It's in how people filled their bellies, passed time, shared space, in how they ate after a bath, in how they waited for their figs to cool. So now you might ask, in the grand sweep of Roman achievement, was it really the bathhouse architecture that mattered most, or the fact that someone, every day, remembered how you liked your beans, wax, prayer, and the shape of the hours? 1,750 words. You wake before dawn, not because you want to, because the bell rings somewhere in the darkness. A thick rope bell tolls once, then again. You don't count the strokes. You don't need to. It's not about timekeeping, it's about rhythm, about obedience. About marking the beginning of another day in the monastery of St. Cuthbert, where life is measured not by minutes but by ritual. You dress in silence, wool robe, corded belt, sandals still damp from yesterday's rain. You follow the others to the chapel. The air smells like cold stone and tallow. Your knees ache, but you kneel anyway. It is time for matins, the first of the 8 daily prayers that make up the divine office. And somewhere in the chapel, just beyond the altar, stands Brother Elrichthin, Graydon, already tending to his candles, because he, more than any bell, keeps time in this place. The problem with time in the 9th century in your world: there are no clocks. The sun is unreliable, it disappears behind clouds for days. Water clocks freeze. Sundials are useless in winter, and monks whose lives depend on rigid prayer schedules cannot simply guess. And so Brother Elric has a theory. What if a candle, carefully made of uniform thickness, consistent wax, steady wick, could burn at a predictable rate? What if time could be measured by light itself? So he begins an experiment, candle making as timekeeping each day after morning prayer. Elric retreats to the wax room, a stone chamber that smells permanently of honey, soot, and damp wool. There he does the following: melts the wax from bees, kept in straw hives just beyond the garden wall, strains impurities using linen scraps, and an old sieve measures, pouring the same amount into each mold. Cuts wicks, each one spun to exactly the same length, and twist, pours and cools, repeating the process 12 times each day. He has determined that one of his standard candles, 6 inches tall, half an inch wide, burns for exactly 2 hours in windless conditions. He makes marks along the side with a heated blade, 6 notches, one every 20 minutes that it is. He believes the beginning of a new order. The candles stand by the second month of his experiment. Brother Elric has constructed a wooden stand beside the altar. It holds 1 candle at a time. Below it, a little shelf holds an hour sandglass, rare imported, unreliably, and a wax tablet for notes. He lights the candle at matins dot and watches every time the flame reaches a notch. He scratches a mark. 1 mark. It is still early. matins dot 2 marks. Time for Lords. 3. Perhaps a short nap before prime. Other monks grumble. The abbot is skeptical. But slowly, Brother Elric becomes the reference point when someone asks when is sext. The answer is no longer when the sun is overhead or after the bread is baked. It's when Elric's 3rd candle reaches its 5th notch. A life by wax's candles do not just mark prayer. They begin to shape chores, study hours, baking times, and even rest periods. Some monks resent this precision. Time, they argue, should belong to God, not to wax. Others embrace it. It means fewer missed prayers, fewer mistakes during Latin recitation, less confusion during fasting days. Soon, novices are taught to watch the candle. Brother Elric, he watches the way the wax pools, how the flame leans, how the soot collects differently in winter. He notes how humidity shortens the burn, how beeswax is more reliable than tallow. He is not just keeping time, he is learning the personality of fire, the fire that fails one stormy night. As thunder echoes across the cloister, the wind forces open a chapel window, the candle blows out. Mid-Lords. No one moves. Brother Elric walks calmly to the altar. He relights it from a covered ember pot, shields the flame, resets the stand, but something has changed. The candle now burns faster, heated by a draft, fed by panic. The marks are off for the first time. His system fails. The abbot says nothing, but later, in the wax room, he visits Elric and says, time, like grace, cannot be forced to stay where you put it. Elric nods, but the next morning he seals the window gaps with wax. So now you might ask, if time slips through windows and flickers in flame, can it ever truly be measured, or only honored in moments of quiet watching? Flickers, faults, and the silence between hours. 1,750 words. Brother Elric is no longer the only one watching the candle. The novices peek at it before chores. The cook uses it to time the boiling of peas. Even the gardener comes to ask, awkwardly, whether his compost turns better after 2 notches or 3. This wasn't what Elric intended. His candles were meant to track prayers, not vegetables. But such is the nature of tools. Once useful, they wander beyond their maker's hands. He begins keeping a wax log, a slate tablet by his bedside, marked daily with burn rates, weather notes, and wick behaviors. He notices that candles burn faster when rain is coming. Soot collects more heavily after feast. Days more incense. The 3rd notch is often misleading if the candle leans to one side. He tries trimming the wicks shorter. That helps, but nothing, he discovers, can stop time from misbehaving. The problem of night and summer. The hours stretch, light lingers, the candles are barely needed, but winter is cruel. The sun rises late and sinks early, and Elric's candles become the only dependable light between prayers, yet they also burn faster in the cold. The monks breathe heavily in the chapel, their breath tilts the flame. The walls weep with condensation. Everything smells faintly of damp wool and scorched. Herr Elric begins double wicking the candles at night. It gives more light, but shortens the burn time. He sacrifices accuracy for warmth. The others don't notice, or if they do, they don't speak of it. They simply watch the flame, nod when it dips past a notch, and file silently to their next prayer. Visitors from elsewhere. One winter morning, a scribe and scholar from another abbey arrives to examine the monastery's rare book of Psalms. He notices the candle stand in the chapel. You use these to mark the offices? He asks, raising an eyebrow. Elric nods. We try to burn 1 per pair of hours. It varies. The scribe examines the marks, then chuckles softly. You know, the Byzantines use water clocks. Water freezes. Elric replies evenly. So does wax, the man says, smiling. Later, Elric finds his log missing. It's been borrowed by the scribe. When it's returned, There's a note in the margin. Your second notch is too close to the third in colder air. Consider spacing more generously. Elric frowns. He adjusts the spacing the next morning. It helps. Rivalry by everyone in the monastery loves the candles. Brother Durant, the bell ringer, considers them a distraction. He believes time belongs to the bell, and the bell belongs to God's voice, not a melting stick of wax. He begins tolling the bell at odd intervals, early for terse, late for complingus, to test the candle's precision. Elric says, nothing but others notice. The abbot calls both men into the cloister one morning. Let the bell ring and the candle burn, he says. One tells us where we are. The other tells us where we hoped to be. It's a compromise, if a poetic one. Durant still rings slightly offbeat. Elric still trims his wicks a little finer. The candle as companion with each passing month. Elric becomes less a monk with a candle and more a caretaker of fragile time. He knows how long it takes for the first bead of wax to run when the flame begins to bend under poor air. How to sniff a candle and know the bees fed on clover or wild mint. Sometimes he sits with a candle long after others have left the chapel. Not praying, not writing, just watching. He begins to suspect that in the silence between notches, in the drift of smoke and the soft gulp of melting wax, something is speaking, not loudly, not in words, but speaking. Still, so now you might ask, if time cannot be captured, only observed, was Brother Elric measuring the hours? Or was he learning, slowly, how to dwell inside them? Wax ashes, and the measure of a life. 1,750 words years pass. The candle stand is worn smooth where hands, and have steadied themselves against it. The wooden base has been scorched, sanded and re-oiled more times than anyone remembers. The notches in the wax are still marked with Brother Elric's careful hand, but the tremor in his fingers now makes the lines slightly uneven. No one complains. If the second notch is a little closer to the third, no one notices, or they do but consider it part of the rhythm. Elric walks slower now. He no longer makes all the candles himself. The novices help. They are clumsy and often leave air bubbles in the wax, which makes the flames sputter, but he trains them patiently. Repeats the process, corrects the pour, shaves the cooled wax by feel. You don't measure time, he tells them one morning. You shape it, you offer it to the light, then you let it go. The last candlelit is deep winter now. Snow along the garden wall, icicles hanging from the cloister eaves. The wax hardens slowly. Even the fires in the refectory struggle to keep the cold at bay. Brother Elric prepares one candle himself. He says nothing, but the others know. This one is his dot. It's a slightly larger taper, 8 inches, broader at the base. The wick is woven from a strip of old robe, washed, dried, twisted by his own hand. He marks it carefully. 7 notches. No one asks why 7. He lights it one morning, just before Lauds. He sits near the altar, wraps himself in his robe, watches a world measured in fire as the candle burns. Time shifts. The others come and go. Maths, Lauds, Prime. They pass through their duties, copying texts, preparing bread, tending the goats, but someone always peeks in to see how far the candle has gone. A thin curl of smoke rises near the 4th notch. The wax pools quietly, like a cup catching warm milk. Elric doesn't take notes today, he simply watches. The measure of a monkey does not speak much anymore, but those around him remember what he said over the years. The wick must be scented. Always, even a small flame burns steady, if protected. Let the wax collapse, it always finds its own shape again. It's not the light that measures the hour. It's how still you are while it burns. They begin to say these things to one another. Not always when he's around. Sometimes during chores, sometimes in jest. But his words outlive his voice. That's what monks do. After all, they keep memory for the world. The final notch, the candle. It reaches its 7th mark just as Vespers ends. The flame dips slightly. Brother Elric smiles once. Not at anyone. Not even at the candle dot, just toward the light. Then he closes his eyes. After the wax he is buried simply. No grand tomb, just a carved wooden cross and a candle lit at each hour of the office, then extinguished until the next. The novices keep making candles. The monks still use the marks, the bell still rings, but in the chapel, beside the altar, the stand remains, worn familiar, a place of watching, not commanding, and the candle, it returns to its cycle, melted, reshaped, reborn in quiet fire. So now you might wonder, if time was never really meant to be ruled only witnessed, was Brother Elric a timekeeper at all? Or simply a man who learned how to sit still and listen as it passed by? Bamboo slips and bare feet. 1,750 words. Close your eyes and picture a messenger, not a man on a tall, proud horse, not draped in armor, not racing through wide stone roads. No, this messenger wears sandals made of twisted hemp. His feet are blistered. His robe is faded. He carries a satchel, tightly knotted, with bamboo slips tied together by cords of silk. And he's running through foggy river valleys, across mountain ridges, along cliffside paths slick with moss. He's not racing for glory. He's delivering imperial orders, and he cannot stop. The world before paper, before the world had envelopes and stamps. Before horses carried mail in leather pouches, China had an elegant, complex system of foot couriers, and long before the Silk Road made headlines or the Pony Express galloped across the American West, the Han Dynasty years ago was already sending messages hundreds of miles in a matter of days. The method, feet, lots of them, and what they carried. Not scrolls, not letters, but bamboo slips, writing on wood in the early centuries BCE. Long before paper was cheap or common, official Chinese documents were recorded on thin strips of bamboo. Each strip was about 10 to 15 inches, long as wide as a finger, polished smooth on one side, written on in neat brushstrokes using black ink. When message might require dozens of slips tied together in sequence with cords. Think of it like a folding wooden scroll, flexible, light, and surprisingly durable. A typical dispatch might include weather reports, crop tallies, instructions from regional governors, edicts from the emperor himself, and each one had to move swiftly across vast provinces, through forests, over rivers, and around enemy borders. Why no horses? It's a good question. China had horses. They used them in war, in trade, for royal chariots. But in many parts of China, especially the south and west, the terrain was too rugged, too wet, and too mountainous for mounted couriers to be efficient. So, instead they relied on humans, agile, fast-moving runners who could duck into forest paths, leap across stepping stones, and cut through unmarked terrain without slowing down. These were the Yogenresh, message men. Their feet were calloused, like leather. Their lungs trained from boyhood, their diet, rice, pickled greens, dried fish, and salted plums to keep up endurance. They ran between relay stations, where fresh messengers took over, day and night. The relay system, a human chain, imagine it, road stretching 400 miles at intervals of 1012 miles. There's a small hut, a relay station, or e-gen. Each ass is manned by 1 or 2 couriers. They wait for a runner to arrive, sweating and breathless. He hands off the bamboo slips, drinks some water, sometimes rests, sometimes turns right back around with a return message. Then the fresh courier runs on. This system meant no single person had to travel the full distance, and messages could move as fast as 100 miles per day, unheard of for the time. Each hut recorded their handoff on a clay tablet, the time, the name of the courier, the destination. If a message was late, someone would know. The hazards of the job. The job wasn't glamorous. Messengers faced snakes, especially in the southern jungles, bandits who knew government orders could mean coin-flooded rivers, often without bridges, cliffs, and landslides during the rainy season, and of course, blister kind that turned to infection if untreated. But it was also a respected job. Many couriers were former soldiers or young men with family ties to the relay huts. Some passed the role from father to son. To be trusted with a message meant you were considered reliable, tough, and essential to the machinery of the state. A message worth running for. There's one preserved set of bamboo slips, discovered in a Han-era tomb in the 20th century, that contains this line at the bottom: the feet must be swift. The message, swifter still. It's likely a reminder to the messenger, not a threat, just a quiet statement of duty. Because in a land so vast, with mountains high and waters wide, a kingdom's stability depended not on force but on the speed of its bamboo dispatches. So now you might ask, in a world of armies and emperors, was the runner with tired feet and a bamboo slip in hand not just as powerful, quietly connecting corners of the realm, one breathless mile at a time? Trust, terrain, and the empire's hidden arteries. 1,750 words. Imagine the courier again, but this time he's not running across an open trail. He's navigating the back alleys of a crowded market town. Ducks flap out of his path. A noodle vendor curses as steam spills. Children watch him pass without speaking because they know his uniform, his bag, and what it means when someone runs without stopping. He doesn't slow down. In his hand is a bamboo dispatch sealed with red lacquer, bearing the mark of the provincial chancellor. It must be at the governor's office before sundown. No time for greetings, no time for noodles, only time for distance and the feet that carry it. The uniform of the courier. Although most early couriers were peasants or low-ranking officials, they were given distinctive clothing, not luxurious, but instantly recognizable. In the Han Dynasty, a typical courier's uniform included a short brown or blue tunic cloth head wrap to keep sweat out of eyes, rope belt with a tally token attached, bamboo sandals or leather foot wraps, a sealed pouch with government markings. These were symbols of official business. Bystanders knew not to interfere. Inns were required to let them rest. Vendors were forbidden from charging them money for water. To harass or obstruct a courier was considered an offense against the state. And still, it happened. Bandits and bambootha dispatches were valuable not just for their content, but for what they represented: imperial power. Bandits sometimes lay in wait near remote relay stations. A runner might be ambushed and robbed of his satchel, sometimes for coin, sometimes to delay a message. Intentionally political sabotage, often paid for in silver. To counter this, certain bamboo slips were split in half, like a jigsaw puzzle. Receiving end would compare it to their matching half coated in colored wax, which would crack if tampered with, written in code. Known only to certain administrators, the runners themselves were often interrogated if a message went missing, which is why so many kept their routes secretive and from their own families. In the end, a good courier needed more than speed. He needed discretion, cleverness, and a sense of when to hide and when to run. The language of bamboo dispatch was part of a system one that stretched from tiny border villages to the glittering halls of the capital. Messages were categorized by urgency. Red ribbon dispatches, TZ, high priority, sent at full speed with multiple runners. Often edicts, disaster reports, or military orders. White slip memos, Baidzan, routine. Slow traveling updates, grain counts, census numbers, tax summaries, Shidduch notice, Kinishoreya, for extremely formal or ceremonial purposes. But most messages, 90%, were just bamboo slip bundles, tied with string, scrolled in fast, neat calligraphy, designed to move information without fanfare. And they did. Thousands of them. Every week. Terrain, as Testone reasoned, the horse was rarely used in these early courier routes, was simple. Terrain. Southern China in particular was riddled with steep jungle, paths, footbridges made of vines, narrow cliff routes where a horse would never pass mud-drenched, floodplains that swallowed hooves, whole switchback trails with stairs carved directly into rock. A human on foot could move quietly, quickly, and without needing fodder or rest stops. Some couriers became so attuned to their terrain they were said to run with their eyes closed, sensing bends in the path by wind and route texture. There's a story from a 2nd century record of a courier who ran through an earthquake zone the day after a landslide. When asked how he crossed the broken road, he said, "I didn't. I went around it. I knew the old deer path nearby. It's shorter anyway." No horse could have done that. The quiet role of the relay station keepers while couriers ran. I had to manage the infrastructure. Relay stations each end were often family-run with 3 generations living in the same compound. Their duties included feeding and resting couriers, preparing sandals, boiling water for tea, guarding message logs, lighting signal lanterns at night. These keepers rarely left their post. They knew every courier by name, weight, breathing, rhythm. They could often tell from the sound of the runner's footfall whether he was early, late, or injured. To the government, these were just low-level functionaries. To the couriers, they were lifelines, the quiet pulse behind the empire's nervous system. So now you might wonder, was it the bamboo slip that carried the empire's commands, or the thin, quiet hands that passed it hut to hut in the silence of the hills? 1,000 miles by foot in faith, 1,750 WZ. Nearly dusk now. The last relay hut flickers with lamplight. The final courier of the day, his robe damp with sweat, his soles caked with mud, passes the bamboo dispatch to a scribe seated beside a lacquered writing desk. The courier bows. He says nothing. The scribe marks the time. Message received. Slip bundle intact. Arrival within expected window. Outside, crickets chirp. The courier drinks a ladle of barley water, stretches his feet, and lays down on a mat near the hearth. Tomorrow he'll begin the return run. The message is gone, but the rhythm remains. No fame, no scrolls, no names in all the volumes of Chinese imperial histories. 24 histories, vast scrolls of dynasties, wars, and emperors. Almost no foot couriers are named. There are generals, poets, eunuchs, even chefs. But the men who ran hundreds of miles to carry edicts and updates, they left no signatures, no portraits, no poems. They were not meant to be remembered. They were meant to keep things working, and yet the empire functioned because of them. Without them, grain deliveries stalled, governors acted on stale news border, skirmishes flared unchecked, farmers overpaid their taxes or missed their exemptions. A nation of millions ran on the feet of a few thousand, and they just kept going. Legacy in the dust. Occasionally, a message failed. The courier never arrived. The bamboo never reached its reader. The reasons are the ones you'd expect. Flash floods, landslides, reversalness, or simply exhaustion in the middle of nowhere. Other couriers found the pouch days later have submerged in river mud or tucked beneath a tree root where someone had crawled to rest and never stood again. In those rare cases, the message was still delivered late, smeared with damp but read nonetheless. And in the margins, a scribe might write, "Original runner perished. Message recovered and relayed onward by station. Feet failed, duty did not." A quiet epitaph. Bamboo obituary. The emperor's invisible web. The Han emperors may not have known the names of their couriers, but they relied on their rhythm. Each province sent weekly reports. Each governor issued local ordinances, tax rolls, weather logs, grain requests, and judicial appeals. All moved through this humming, dusty web of human pathways. At its height, the courier system reached over 2,000 relay stations spanning 9,000 miles of trade routes, with messages reaching the capital from distant regions in under 2 weeks, and all of it moved without horses, without wheels, without fanfare, just cloth shoes, bamboo cords, dry rice in a pouch, and a will to keep running. A footprint left in stone in the Sichuan mountains. Archaeologists once found a flat stone on an old courier path. It bore a faint footprint pressed deep, worn by time, and smoothed by weather. Couldn't say if it belonged to a courier, but nearby they found A rusted wick holder, a broken bamboo slip-hand ink brush with a snapped handle, no coins, no weapons, no markers, just the memory of a man who may have stopped briefly, leaned against a rock, and then moved on. The message continues today. The paths are overgrown, the huts are mostly gone, rotted into moss and silence. But in a way, their work never ended, because systems of post, communication, news, and relayed truth, these are not just modern inventions, they're human needs, born in bare feet and mountain passes, kept alive by the stubborn endurance of those who didn't ask to be remembered, only to be trusted. So now, before sleep takes you, ask yourself, if no one remembers the name of the man who ran with the message, does the message still carry part of his breath, his heartbeat, his footsteps across the centuries? The Ottoman palace staff who only worked at night. Section 1. In the quiet hours of empire, 1,750 words. The palace doesn't sleep. Even at midnight, someone is polishing the silver doors of the Imperial harem. Someone is warming the tiles beneath the Sultan's bath. Someone else is walking a dark corridor holding a lantern, watching for sound that should not be there. It is the 16th century in Istanbul, and Topkapi Palace glows faintly under a quarter moon. The city outside is mostly quiet, just a few distant donkeys, a muezzin's echo, the creak of ship masts near the water. But inside the palace, in velvet dark rooms and tiled hallways, a full shift of men is already at work. You will not see them in paintings, but they are there, a city inside. A city. The Poppy Palace is more than a royal home. It is an entire city within high garden walls. Nearly 4,000 people live and work here during the height of the Ottoman Empire. There are janissaries, elite soldiers, scribers, grinders, towel folders, candle trimmers, water pipe cleaners, and more. Each role has its own room, its own rank, its own rulebook. And while most of the palace rises with the dawn and rests before midnight, there is a class of servants whose shift starts when the sun disappears. The Jaseksi, or night staff. Who were the Jaseksi? Just simply means those of the night. They were trusted eunuchs, elderly scribes, silent, janissary launderers, secretaries who copied imperial notes long after dinner, crandlin who trimmed and replaced lamps so no flame ever died. Their job, to maintain the illusion that the palace functioned without effort, that every curtain stayed clean, every floor glowed, every hallway was freshly scented with rosewater, that the Sultan's slippers were always exactly where he left them, and his bath was always warm no matter the hour. Moving through night staff had rules. No speaking above a whisper, no shoes in the tiled rooms, only soft leather slippers or bare feet, no entering certain areas like the harem without explicit permission and witness. Every action must leave no trace by morning. They carried lanterns, not candles, which could drip, but oil lamps with glass covers. Their light was soft, warm, and cast shadows like old paintings. Most Jasechi carried a small bell tucked in cloth, used only in emergencies, to summon help or signal something unusual. The bells were never rung casually. A single chime in the wrong courtyard could cause a full alert. Jobs done while you slept. So what exactly did they do? Replaced wilted flowers in the Imperial courtyards, polished brass door plates with lemon water-oiled wooden floors with rose and clove checked. Each of the Sultan's 30 personal clocks, he collected them, recorded night sounds, yes, owl calls, distant thunder, or arguments near the harbor, all logged in a leather book. Prepared quiet breakfasts for those who rose before dawn. Prayers, one particularly curious task. Linen warming. Each morning, the Sultan and high officials received their inner garments, robes, towels, slippers warmed to body temperature. This meant someone had to heat stones, wrap the cloth, and deliver them just as the first call to prayer echoed. The warmth was brief but expected. Training in silence. You didn't apply to be Jetsetsi. You were chosen, usually from among the inner palace staff, those who already understood the rhythm of quiet work. Training involved learning the layout of the palace by feel so you could navigate blindfolded, practicing silent walk, steps, heeled tutor movement, and felt slippers, memorizing scent schedules. Certain days had specific incense burned in corridors, knowing how to remove wax strips without marring a tile, carrying notes in reed tubes, tucked into robes to stay dry. If Dropte Master Jeski was not just a servant, he was part god, part caretaker, part shadow. His success was measured by how invisible he remained. When the Sultan walked at night, there are rare records of sultans who roamed the palace at night, restless, thoughtful, or simply curious. The Magnificent, it's said, often walked the tiled courtyards in slippers, speaking with no one. The Jetseki would not greet him, would not look directly at him, but they would discreetly ensure his path was clear. Light lamps, a few steps ahead, leave warm tea on a bench nearby, remove any object that might disturb him. A leaf, a lost slipper, a spilled jar. By morning, the Sultan's walk would be unrecorded. Except for a single line in the night ledger. His Majesty walked the eastern path. Tea accepted. All was well. So now you might wonder, if your job is to pass through the palace without leaving a single trace, do you still exist in the story of the empire, or only in its silence, dust, secrets, and the quiet machinery of empire? 1,750 words. By midnight, most of the palace has gone still. The kitchen fires are banked with ash, The harem gates are latched. Courtiers lie beneath wool blankets stitched with imperial motifs, roses, scimitars, and tulips. But beneath this hush, the Jessici are just hitting their stride. Their hours run from sunset to sunrise, and their purpose is not simply to clean or guard, it is to prepare the illusion of seamlessness of palace, where nothing ever breaks, nothing is ever dusty, and no hallway ever smells of onions or sweat. It is, in short, to erase evidence that the palace was lived in at all. Dust patrol and tile whisper stopopy is tiled from floor to ceiling in many rooms. These are not simple ceramics. They are Isnic tiles painted with cobalt blue, emerald, and iron red glaze, arranged in elaborate floral patterns. By day, they shine. By night, they must be dusted, not scrubbed. Jecha used fine cloths, goat, wool, or silk wrapped around thin reeds to gently wipe between tiles. Not for cleanliness exactly, but to catch the light more beautifully at dawn. This task was called sus tazu, silent dust. Some tile rooms were acoustically strange, especially those with domed ceilings. The slightest noise would echo. So the men who worked these rooms spoke in coded gestures. A tilt of the lamp, a tap of the knuckle, a held breath. Entire shifts passed without a word, and yet every smudge was gone by morning. The incense schedule the palace ran on more than light and silence. It ran on scent. Each night of the week had a scheduled incense rotation. Cedar and myrrh for Monday, ambergris for Tuesday, sandalwood for Friday. The Koku Momoro scent steward was part of the night staff. His job was to burn the correct incense in key chambers, replace the charred resins with fresh material. The smoke gently along corridors using folded fans keep scent records amount used, how quickly it burned. Staff reactions and mistaken scent could have political consequences. For example, if jasmine was used on a day meant for frankincense, it might suggest romantic intent, dangerous implication in a palace full of hierarchy, suspicion, and etiquette. So the scent steward worked alone, quietly, wearing gloves, tucking away even the tiniest ashes. Paper that glowed in the dark. One of the Jessiti's most curious jobs involved phosphorescent inks, a well-kept secret in the Sultan's court. Certain high-priority memos were written with ink that, when mixed with crushed shell or egg white and held near a lamp, would faintly glow in the dark. These were called ex-clay meched-up light letters. They were read only at night, handled only by night secretaries, stored in special boxes, wrapped in oiled silk coffin, addressed from one royal to another. Regarding matters best kept out of daylight, Jaichi, assigned to these letters, wore tinted spectacles. To avoid eye strain, they copied by feel and rhythm, tracing each glowing line with a soft goat hair brush. Once copied, the originals were often burned. Only the soft scent of scorched pearl gave any sign that a letter had lived at all. The silent Dr. Mungaja Chechi was always one-night physician, known as the SKT Hekamilatori, quiet doctor. He did not make rounds unless summoned, but he was awake, always held his pouch included. Clove paste for toothache, rose water-soaked gauze for fever's fig, tonic for indigestion, black cumin oil for joint pain. He carried no metal tools they clinked to loudly, and his shoes were padded. He treated eunuchs with exhaustion, janissaries with sprained ankles, laundrymen with steam burns, scribes with neck cramps from long hours hunched over glowing ink. He took no notes, only memory, and sometimes he left a dried violet on the pillow of someone he treated, pressed between two slips of parchment, not as a prescription but as a whisper. Accidents, apologies, and the penalty of sound. Despite their training, Giuseppe made mistakes. One candle knocked over, one sneeze in the wrong hole, one spilled basin echoing like a thunderclap through the SCRIPTORIUM. Punishment was rare, but not impossible. Usually it came in the form of reassignment to the day shift, which meant public work, less prestige, and the slow burn of knowing you'd broken the invisible trust of the night. There's a record of one man, Yusuf the Younger, who dropped a clay inkpot in the Hall of Felicity. It cracked in two, ink everywhere. He cleaned it perfectly. No trace remained, but a single scuff mark on the tile grout betrayed him. He was quietly transferred to courtyard sweeping. The night is not a place for scuff marks, so now you might ask, if no one was supposed to know they were there, and their only sign was absence, can a person build a life, a purpose, a place in history, on the back of disappearing? The Ottoman palace staff who only worked at night, section 3, the invisible clock that ran the empire, 1750 Zit is the hour before the first call to prayer. You hear nothing but the low crackle of an oil lamp somewhere, faintly, the splash of water in a marble basin. The scent of amber and cedar still lingers in the corridors. The night staff, those quiet, sleepless caretakers of the palace, are completing their final rounds. There is no applause, no audience, only the rhythm of finishing, so that others may begin. The dawn tenders, one group of Jessechi, were called Tanvakti Bekaleri, those who wait for dawn. They had a single purpose, to hand off the palace to the day staff. This involved relighting hallway lamps to full brightness, setting out slippers and fresh towels near every royal chamber, leaving warm water for early morning washing, and locking garden gates for the first gardener of the day, checking that the clocks, every single one, were synchronized, and then they disappeared. Back through the tunnels, the narrow stairs, the servant doors built flush with the walls. Their shift ended as the Resins' voice echoed over the BOSPHORUS. By the time the first courtier stretched and pulled aside his curtain, the night was already packed away. The Book of Night, due to a few dusty volumes, remain in the top copy archives, hidden between prayer books and culinary inventories. They are bound in soft leather, water-stained and soot-edged. Their title, Vasifelleri Defteri, the Book of Night Duties. Inside, candle checklists, floor, maps with dust, routes and formulas, timing logs, start warming towels. 1 hour before A's on-scent schedules, Thursday, musk, burn low, no more than 3 cones. Notes in the margins. New boy stepped on dried lentil. Loud move, pantry baskets. Guest in south quarters requested warm milk, prepared, returned untouched. No signatures, just neat handwriting, always, in brown ink, likely written with the same reed pens they used by LAMPLIGHT. Where did they sleep? Most Chesexi lived in a small cluster of rooms tucked beneath the second courtyard, near the baths. These rooms had no windows, brick, floors, thick stone walls, wool mats, stacked 2 or 3 high hooks for lanterns, and out ropes in wash basins and wooden chests. They didn't decorate much, but some left personal marks. A carved tulip on a bedpost, a strand of horsehair tied around a nail, perhaps from a sister's brush, dried figs tucked inside a satchel. Here they slept, through the day. Their rest was not deep, not undisturbed. Top copy is never fully silent, but it was sufficient. Enough to rise again when the sun set. The ones who stayed for life, some Jajeki served for decades, too old for daytime work, too discreet to retire. They became masters of the dark guides for the younger ones, quiet counselors, keepers of layout knowledge not written down. One man, known only as Halal the Pale, served 39 years on the night shift. He had a perfect record, never dropped a lamp, never overslept, never lost a message. When he died in his chamber, a violet was placed on his blanket, and the scribe noted, he never spoke louder than a whisper. He was the last to leave, and the first to return. He was not buried with honors. But for a week, the incense burned twice as long. Why it mattered, the night shift didn't win battles. They didn't negotiate treaties. They didn't write history. But they prevented chaos, kept standards, guarded privacy. Medicine in silence, replaced cracked tiles before anyone noticed it, lit candles at every turn, ensuring no one ever walked in darkness in a palace of power. Perception was everything. To the sultan, to his wives, to his advisors and rivals, the palace had to appear timeless, clean, serene, UNMOVING, and that illusion required an army of invisible men moving while the world dreamed. A final bellic when an important guest stayed overnight. The Jashetsi were asked to leave a final touch, just before sunrise. On the table beside the guest's bed, a small bowl of dates, a single candle, trimmed and ready, a soft bell like a child's toy resting on a square of folded cloth. It was both a gesture of service and a symbol. If you need us, ring. If you don't, we are still here, waiting, moving, vanishing by design. So now, before we leave the palace and return to sleep, ask yourself if a world runs because of people no one ever sees. Do their quiet labors echo more deeply, simply because they never needed to be heard? Paper skies and the art of looking up. 1,750 words. The year is 1803. You are walking down a cobbled street in Paris, and above you, the sky is beginning to change. Not dramatically, just a slow gathering of white streaks across a pale spring morning. To most, it's an idle curiosity. To Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, it is data. He stops, tilts his head, pulls out a notebook. And while others step around him murmuring, laughing, or focused on their errands, he simply stares up for 5 full minutes. Then he scribbles 3 neat lines in brown ink, under a pre-drawn diagram of the Paris skyline, stratus forming at low altitude, direction northeast, movement, slow, texture, flattened, ragged, humidity, high, light, diffuse, possible rain within 6 hours. He closes the book, keeps walking. He will do this 3 more times today, and every day for the next 5 years. Not a meteorologist who might expect Lamarck was a weather expert. He wasn't. He was a naturalist, a man of dried leaves, pressed flowers, butterfly pins, and anatomical sketches. A quiet academic who spent most of his time at the Jardin des Plantes, teaching botany and reorganizing dusty museum drawers. The clouds fascinated him, not for their beauty but for their patterns. He believed that, like animals or rocks, clouds could be classified, categorized, and perhaps even understood through patient observation. At the time, this was unusual. Clouds were considered too fleeting, too subjective. Some called them sky ephemera, nothing more than scenery. Lamarck disagreed. He believed they were a language, a silent one, but one you could learn. The 5 types no one remembered. In 1802, Lamarck quietly published a short paper titled Sur les formes des nuages, on the forms of clouds. It was not widely read. Printed on plain paper, barely 10 pages long, it listed 5 cloud categories, all based on careful sketching and repeat sightings from Paris rooftops, and formed a voile veil-shaped, what we now call cirrostratus atrius grouped, cumulus-type clouds, mottled altocumulus, especially at dawn, brulets, foggy low stratus or mist that lingers, pluie et dew, extended rain, thick, flat layers of dark reach. Came with a description, a sketch, and a brief note on what weather usually followed. Lamarck urged fellow scientists to use these names, to look up, to pay attention. Few did. His cloud system was largely ignored in France, and completely unknown elsewhere. A man alone with the weather. Lamarck continued alone. Each morning, he walked to the top floor of the museum building, where a narrow window faced the Seine. There he observed wind direction with a simple hanging ribbon cloud shape and layering some light color and change fog. Behavior over the river. He recorded these, not with modern instruments, but by trained habit. He could judge barometric shifts by the way sound traveled from the street. He tracked humidity by how his notebook paper curled. He estimated wind speed by the lean of chimneys. Each page of his weather logs included a small, hand-drawn sky map, Latin timestamps, hora prima, hora sexta, etc. Notes on sensation, air thick, scent of coal, clothing dampens by mid-morning. They weren't just scientific logs, they were acts of attention, of noticing the invisible clouds. As companions, it said that Lamarck later in life went half blind. His eyesight faded. His students grew fewer. His name was overshadowed by other thinkers, including a young Charles Darwin, who would later challenge and expand on Lamarck's broader theories of evolution. But even as the world moved on, he still took cloud notes. He used a magnifying lens to check details, asked students to describe shapes for him when his vision failed, and still he pressed each line of ink carefully across the page, mapping the sky. He once wrote in a letter, "A man can walk through a field and never see the same sky twice, but if he walks it every day, he learns its moods. This is the science I follow." So now you might wonder, if your work is overlooked and your words fade, but the skies still carry your thoughts in shape and motion, did you truly go unnoticed? At all? Rival skies in the Battle of Names, 1,750 words. It is now 1804, and something curious has happened. Across the English Channel, in a chilly London study, another man has begun his own sky observations. His name is Luke Howard. He is a Quaker, a chemist, a thinker, and, like Lamarck, he is obsessed with clouds. But unlike Lamarck, he is fluent in Latin, trained in classical taxonomy, and keen to publish for international scientific circles. Howard observes clouds not from museum rooftops, but from the edge of industrial London, where smoke mingles with vapor, and weather comes and goes like gossip. That same year, he delivers a lecture titled, "On the Modification of Clouds," and with it, introduces three bold universal categories: cumulus, heap, stratus, layer, cirrus, curl. Later, he adds nimbus, rain-producing, and hybrid terms like stratocumulus. His work spreads, quickly translated, praised, cited by poets and naturalists alike. Within 5 years, it becomes the global standard, and he is not mentioned. Two men, one sky. What makes Howard's system more successful? Latin naming equals scientific authority, simplicity. Only a few core types say catchy idea. Clouds as modifications, not permanent structures, better timing. England is entering a golden age of science communication, and, perhaps most importantly, Howard published in a language everyone else could read. Lamarck's system, elegant and poetic in its own right, remains confined to French naturalist circles, many of whom are already busy debating evolution, fossils, and political revolution. No one has time for clouds, not Lamarck's clouds. Anyway, what Lamarck did next, if he felt rivalry, he didn't record it. Lamarck didn't revise his system. He didn't publish a rebuttal. He simply kept writing in his notebooks. His focus shifted from classification to chronology. Now, instead of sketching cloud types, he tracked how long each form lasted, how they changed shape with the hour, how sunset color altered edges, how morning fog yielded to midday stratus. He drew tiny timelines like scrolls across his pages, a sort of sky diary. He began to mark the mood of each day. Jour diably, a day of forgetfulness, for when clouds never cleared. Jour press, a hurried day, for when systems moved too fast to follow. Jour and spiral, a spiraling day when clouds layered oddly. These weren't forecasts, they were sky stories. No one else saw them. The museum and the mold. As Lamarck aged, his duties at the Jardin des Plantes shifted. Fewer lectures, more archiving, relabeling fossils, sorting dried leaves, fighting mildew on specimen drawers. His cloud logs began to show signs of neglect: ink smudges, missed days, water stains, repetitions. One spring, during a long stretch of illness, he wrote only a single entry for a 10-day period. Fog, then no fog, then light. But in the final years of his sky journal, he added something new. He began to record his dreams, clouds in sleep, clouds over rivers he'd never seen, clouds shaped like letters, clouds falling, and one recurring image, a sky with no name, no language, just drifting forms above a man who writes them anyway. Legacy in vapors. Lamarck died in 1829, mostly blind, mostly forgotten. His name survives today in discussions of early evolutionary theory and in textbooks about pre-Darwinian ideas. a curious soft-spoken figure with theories later dismissed but ideas that sparked something larger. As for his cloud work, his notebooks were archived, misfiled, and forgotten for decades. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that a French historian of science, cataloging botanical logs, stumbled across several of Lamarck's early sky pages. She published an article, Lamarck, Le Rêve du Ciel, Lamarck the Dreamer of the Sky. The article didn't change meteorology, but it reminded the world that more than one man tried to name the clouds, and one of them did it alone, in Paris, with nothing but ink, breath, and patience. So now you might ask, if two people name the same thing and only one is remembered, does the sky forget the other? Or do the clouds carry both voices, drifting quietly between them, without choosing sides? Would you like to continue to section 3 of story 7, the 19th century Frenchman who catalogued clouds by hand? The sky that outlives its names, 1,750 words. It is spring again in Paris. The year is now 1825. And Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, once a celebrated lecturer and naturalist, sits by a shuttered window in the museum's private quarters. He is almost completely blind. He listens to footsteps in the hall, a breeze shifting the paper curtain, the faint squawk of parrots from the museum's aviary. He cannot see the clouds anymore, but he imagines them, draws them, even slowly, shakily, with help from a student who visits twice a week. The student holds Lamarck's hand at the wrist, guiding the pen through memories, motions. Together, they trace the edges of the sky he used to see. The decline of a dreamer in his final years. Lamarck lived modestly. His pension was small, his daughters supported him when they could. His reputation among French scientists had dimmed partly due to his theories of use and disuse in biology, which many rejected, and partly because he never courted favor. He published less and less, but he still wrote each morning. He dictated observations, sometimes about weather, sometimes about memories of the jardin, sometimes about light, and often about clouds. One passage from his final dictated notes reads, "Though the names have changed, the forms are the same. The veil-shaped clouds I once recorded now pass unmarked, but they pass all the same, and I feel their movement in the air, even if I can no longer follow them with my eyes." Clouds without borders in England. Luke Howard's cloud classification system had become global standard. His terms cumulus, stratus, cirrus, nimbus were adopted by the Royal Society, European meteorological circles, naval officers and shipping merchants, eventually school textbooks in 1853. Decades after Lamarck's death, an International Meteorological Congress confirmed Howard's system as official. The sky had been named. But here's the quiet truth. Clouds don't care what you call them. They still roll in from the Atlantic. They still gather above Montmartre. They still cast long shadows at dusk. And sometimes, when the weather is right, the French sky takes on Lamarck's old five forms, even if no one remembers the words. The lost notebooks for over a century. Lamarck cloud journals were shelved and overlooked. Some were misplaced during renovations. Others were miscatalogued as botanical sketches. A few were scorched during a fire in the museum annex in 1901, but not all were lost in the 1950s. A curator found a slim, leather-bound volume with water stains pressed between volumes of zoology texts. Inside, diagrams of the Paris skyline, columns labeled pluie voile, troops, and dated entries in the careful cursive of a patient observer. Each page had sky sketches, marginal notes, light from west, movement, lazy arrows drawn toward the horizon, and the occasional personal comment, remembered scent of magnolia. Chimney smoke pointed northeast today, never seen this before. A good cloud day. 5 types by sunset. These pages were later digitized, exhibited in a small French weather museum, and quietly rediscovered by modern historians. No fanfare, just recognition. Long delayed, but real. Cloud by any other name in 2003. On the 200th anniversary of Howard's cloud paper, the French Meteorological Society published a companion piece before Cyrus Lamarck in the Skies of Paris. It included side-by-side illustrations from both men. The clouds were the same, that names were different. One in Latin, precise and lasting, the other in French, gentle and fleeting. Together, they told a shared truth that looking up is itself an act of devotion, and naming things, even if the names fade, is a way of connecting to the world. Lamarck may not have won the naming rights, but he helped remind us the sky was worth noticing. A final reflection: you may never have heard of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck's clouds, you may never see the words attroops or pomelies in a forecast. But the idea that ordinary weather is worthy of study, that beauty can be mapped, that a man with no special tools can still document the shifting breath of the heavens, that idea remains. So the next time you look up, consider this. You may be gazing at the same cloud form Lamarck once sketched by hand on a quiet rooftop in Paris, ink-stained, hopeful, and certain that even the sky deserved a taxonomy. So now, before sleep folds over, you ask yourself, is the legacy of a life measured by who remembers your name, or by how many others keep looking up long after you're gone? The African emperor who sent a caravan of gold across the Sahara, Section 1, sand, salt, and the long road to Mecca, 1,750 words. The year is 1324. You are standing on the edge of the Sahara Desert in what is now modern-day Mali. It is morning, but already the sand glitters with heat. The camel handlers are tightening saddles. The scribes are checking bundles of scrolls. The gold weight wrapped in leather is packed into wooden chests. You are one among thousands. A traveler, a worker, a witness. Part of a procession nearly 4,000 kilometers long, stretching from Timbuktu to Cairo, and then on to Mecca. At the head of this caravan rides a man named Mansa Musa, the emperor of Mali, ruler of a realm so vast it touches the Atlantic. In the west and the desert in the north, he is going on Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that all Muslims are encouraged to make. But this is no quiet spiritual journey. It is an economic event, a political signal, a demonstration, and above all, a logistical miracle. How many people came? Later, Arab historians, especially the famous scholar Al-Amari, attempted to describe the scale of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage. They recorded 60,000 people in toto, including 12,000 slaves, each carrying 4-pound gold staffs, a personal escort of 500, elite guards, over 80 camels, each bearing up to 300 pounds of gold dust, additional herd of cattle and sheep for food along the way. That's not a caravan. That's a moving city. And yet, it functioned with astonishing order. Every night camps were set in neat circles. Water was rationed based on distance to the next oasis. Fires were lit for cooking, but extinguished early to conserve smoke. Prayers were held. Food was distributed. Scrolls were read aloud. Each person had a role. Even the gold handlers. Gold, not for buying, but for showing. You might think the gold was for spending, but most of it, WASN single quotes, did was for giving. Mensa Musa believed that his wealth bestowed by God through the land of Mali should be shared strategically. So along the journey he built mosques in villages that had none, paid off the debts of fellow pilgrims, donated lavish sums to Islamic schools, and scholars left gold coins in markets to encourage trade. When he reached Cairo, his generosity was so overwhelming that he flooded the market with gold. The result, a crash in the value of gold, inflation across Egypt that lasted for more than a decade, and whispered tales across Europe that there existed an African empire where the rivers run yellow. Who was Mansa Musa, really? The name Mansa means emperor, or Sultan. Musa inherited the throne of Mali in 1312, likely after the death or disappearance of his predecessor, Abu Bakr Tua, ruler who, according to legend, sailed west with hundreds of ships in search of new lands, never to return. Musa was different. He expanded the empire not by sea, but by strengthening its trade routes and embracing Islamic scholarship. Under his rule, the city of Timbuktu became a major center of learning. Gold and salt trade boom. Routes were fortified and mapped, and Mali's name reached Venice, Cairo, Constantinople, and even early maps of Europe in the Catalan Atlas of 1375. A Spanish cartographer drew a seated black king in golden robes, holding a gold nugget, captioned, "This man is the richest and most noble king in all the land." That man was Musa, traveling in the desert. But here's the part that rarely gets mentioned. Traveling with 60,000 people across the Sahara is not easy. The caravan had to navigate dunes that shifted daily, avoid bandits who targeted gold convoys, ration water. With mathematical precision, use the stars and the wind for direction time. Movements to avoid midday heat, resting from noon to 3 p.m. in canvas tents. Camels rotated loads to prevent exhaustion. Messengers ran ahead to scout safe watering points, and in some stretches, where even salt was precious, guides were paid in pinches of gold dust measured with ceramic spoons. This wasn't just a show of wealth, it was a test of logistics, diplomacy, and devotion. So now you might ask, how much power does a man truly hold if it takes 60,000 others to move his message across the sand? And the world remembers the gold, but forgets the faces who carried it. The day Cairo turned gold, 1,750 words, the caravan arrives on the outskirts of Cairo in the summer of 1324. Even before Mansa Musa dismounts, the city already knows he is here. Word has traveled ahead, passed by merchants, pilgrims, and scouts. An emperor comes. He carries gold like others carry bread. First contact with the Mamluks at the time. Cairo is part of the Mamluk Sultanate, a powerful Islamic state, ruled not by hereditary kings, but by military elites, many of whom were once enslaved as boys and trained into command. The Sultan then is Al-Malik al-Nasser Muhammad, a seasoned ruler, politically shrewd and fond of displays of power. So when he hears of Mansa Musa's approach, he sends an envoy. Their message is polite but firm. The Sultan invites you to pay formal respect, but Musa refuses, not out of arrogance, but religious humility. He tells the envoys, "I am on pilgrimage, one bow only in Mecca." It becomes a delicate problem. Cairo is not just a waypoint, it's the largest, wealthiest city on the route to Mecca. Relations here matter. So the Sultan tries again, this time through scholars and imams, not soldiers, and this time Musa agrees. But what follows is not a subtle visit, it is an economic event. The gold begins to flow according to contemporary accounts, including those by famed historian Al-Amari, who visited Cairo a few years later. Musa's entrance into the city caused a financial storm. He gave out gold to to the poor, lining the streets to mosque, builders to scholars and students to traders in the Khan El Khalili market to governors, hosts and every child who smiled at him. Gold coins. Gold dust. Gold jewelry. So much gold, in fact, that its value plummeted. The ripple effect. Historians believe Mansa Musa's generosity flooded Cairo's markets with gold. Within weeks, prices rose sharply. The cost of bread doubled, salt prices soared, land values wobbled. Craftsmen demanded higher pay, citing the Musa inflation. For the first time in recorded history, a single person had manipulated a regional economy simply by being too generous. And it wasn't just Cairo. The effects rippled out with long trade routes to Damascus, Medina, and even North Africa. Years later, European chroniclers still marveled. In Africa, there is a king who travels with gold in such abundance. It poisons the markets like too much honey in tea. The Sultan's response to his credit. Sultan al-Nasser did not express anger. Instead, he held a lavish banquet in Musa's honor, served on gold platters, perfumed with cinnamon and orange blossom. He presented the emperor with rare textiles, maps of Arabia, and a set of Quranic scrolls from the city's best calligrapher. In return, Musa gifted camels, spices, and gold ornaments. The two men never became close allies, but they understood each other. Power recognizes power even across language. And sand. What Musa saw in Chiromancer. Musa used his time in Cairo not just to give, but to learn. He studied urban planning, Islamic architecture, library structures, taxation, systems, calligraphy, techniques, and most importantly, religious schools. He visited Al-Azhar University, one of the oldest centers of Islamic learning in the world. He asked its imams what makes knowledge last longer than empires. He left with scholars, architects, and engineers whom he invited to return with him too. Mali after the Hajj. This was not just about pilgrimage. This was an imperial recruitment trip, and Cairo was his talent pool. Pilgrimage continues after several weeks in Cairo. The caravan moved east through the Red Sea ports, across dusty hill trails, into the Hejaz. By the time Musa reached Mecca, his entourage had shrunk slightly. Some had fallen ill, others remained in Cairo, and a few had quietly slipped away with bags of gifted gold, but the core remained. He completed the rites. He walked between the hills of Safa and Marwa. He stood on Mount Arafat. And in doing so, he joined hundreds of thousands of Muslims across generations, none richer perhaps, but all equal before the Kaaba. For a moment, Mansa Musa was not a king, just another man facing God. So now, as the caravan prepares to return westward, ask yourself, what happens when generosity becomes too heavy to carry? Can wealth given freely still weigh down the very people it was meant to uplift? The Golden Return and the Legacy of Timbuktu, 1,750 words. The year is 13 to 5. You are back in the dunes. The dust is familiar now, sticking to your eyebrows, gathering in the folds of your robe. The camels are thinner, the guards quieter, the songs less frequent, but something else travels with you now. Blueprints, books, brilliance, Mansa. Musa is returning to Mali not just with stories of Cairo and Mecca, but with plans. To build a university. To raise stone mosques that would last centuries. To turn Timbuktu into a beacon for scholars across Africa and beyond. The price of generosity. But first, trouble. According to several accounts including and oral West African traditions, Musa's return was not easy. The gold reserves were depleted. Markets along the return route demanded higher prices. Traders, aware of Musa's earlier generosity, now expected lavish payments, so beyond measure. Just a year prior was forced to borrow gold from merchants in Cairo to fund the return journey. Don't think about that. The richest man in the world, borrowing coins to pay the toll. It wasn't ruinous. Mali still had immense resources, but it was a quiet irony, the price of being too generous too quickly. Rebuilding the empire back in Timbuktu, the real work began. Musa commissioned the Jingaba Mosque, still standing today. Sanka University, not a single building, but a network of scholars, scroll libraries, and open-air teaching court schools for Quranic studies. Astronomy, medicine, law, and mathematics scripturists where manuscripts were copied, translated, and bound by hand. The materials were local mud brick, wood, sandstone, but the ideas, they came from Cairo, Mecca, Al-Andalus, and beyond. Mali, once seen as a distant gold supplier, now stood at the center of African intellectual life. Timbuktu, not just a metaphor in modern usage. Timbuktu is sometimes shorthand for a faraway place, but in the 14th and 15th centuries, it was a destination for scholars from Morocco and Egypt, poets from Nigeria, traders from Ghana, pilgrims from the Maghreb. At its peak, the libraries of Timbuktu held tens of thousands of manuscripts in everything from astronomy, navigation, orthics, architecture, agriculture, dream interpretation, grammar, and rhetoric. Mansa Musa didn't build all of it from scratch, but he redirected the flow of resources, attention, and curiosity toward it. His Hajj wasn't just a personal act of faith, it was an investment in civilization, a reputation that traveled far even after his death. Believed to be around 1337, Mansa Musa's name continued to ripple outward. He appeared on maps, on merchant lists, in travelers' tales. European cartographers who had never set foot in West Africa still drew him on their atlases. Seated on a golden throne, labeled Mansa Musa, the richest man known to us. In Venice, Genoa, and Lisbon, sailors asked about Mali. In Cairo, merchants recalled the king who walked like a caliph, and in Mecca, pilgrims told stories of a caravan that glittered like the sun. He had become mythic, but unlike many myths, his legacy was not lost in fantasy. It was written in architecture and scholarship and dust. Gold wasn't the most valuable thing he carried. It's tempting to remember Mansa Musa only for his gold, but what he left behind matters more. Mosques still use today, libraries with handwritten manuscripts from the 1300 essay, record of international diplomacy across African and Arab worlds, and a model of leadership rooted in faith. Learning and infrastructure, he made Mali known, not through war, not through conquest, but through the quiet persuasion of education and generosity. So now, as you drift into sleep, ask yourself what lasts longer, gold, or the ideas it was used to carry across the sand. The medieval recipes that required a mortar, a goose, and an hour of prayer. Section 1. Ink-stained cookbooks and the mysteries of almond milk. 1,750 words. The year is 1392, and you are a kitchen servant in a French noble household. Your hands up, read from peeling garlic. You smell like leeks and goose fat, and you've just been handed a velvet-bound book by the steward, who tells you, tonight's feast requires this. You open the book carefully. The ink is fading. The pages are stained with saffron fingerprints. The title reads, La Viette, recipe collection attributed to the famed court chef Guillaume Tirel, better known as Taillevent. That it is one of the oldest cookbooks in Europe, and it is baffling how medieval recipes worked or didn't, unlike modern cookbooks. La Viande does not tell you the exact quantities, the cook time, the oven temperature, or what to do if something goes wrong. Instead, you get lines like, take a good goose, scald it, and boil it well. Then roast it, then take almond milk and mix with good spices and set it to boil again. Let it be served hot, with saffron and sugar. No quantities, no serving size, no clarity on why you're boiling and then roasting and then boiling again. You simply trust the process and pray that Lord's guests don't complain. Wait, almond milk. In the 14th century, yes. Medieval almond milk was not a health fad, it was practical. In a world where dairy spoiled quickly and animal fasting was often required during Lent or religious fast days, almond milk was a substitute. Grind almonds in a mortar, soak them in warm water, strain the pulp, sweeten if needed. It was used in soup, stews, custards, meat, sauces. It was also very expensive, so its use in a recipe meant, this dish is important, don't mess it up. Saffron, spikenard, and goose sliver. Other recipes from the period required saffron hand-picked from flowers. More expensive than gold by weight, spikenard, a Himalayan root, imported through Venetian merchants, ginger, galangal, and grains of paradise, African and Asian spices carried by caravan. These were ingredients that had to travel through Arabic spice markets, Mediterranean ports, the taxes and shipwrecks. When a cook used them, they weren't just making food, they were announcing wealth, trade connections, and status. A dish like white capon and sauce of Persia might be served with poached chicken, ground rice, rose water, clove, and sugar dyed pink with beetroot or crushed insects. This was not simple fare, it was edible theater. The role of the mortar and the prayer. Many recipes called for everything to be ground in a mortar. Spices, even bread. This took hours. The pounding was so constant that medieval kitchens had apprentices whose only job was to grind paste all day. One monk wrote in a side note, my arm is as the mortar's pestle without end and without glory. Some recipes, especially those for festival days, included the instruction, boil for the length of a pater noster, the Lord's Prayer. This was timekeeping, before kitchen timers. Cooks measured boiling time by prayer length. Longer prayers meant longer boils. In one case, a custard was to be stirred for a full rosary, roughly 45 minutes of recitation. Serving peacocks and dying pork blew at major feasts. Chefs were expected to amaze. Recipes in noble households included roasted peacocks, redressed in their own feathers, pork dyed blue or green with herbs and copper salt, sugar sculptures of saints, ships, or siege tower swamp pies with gold leaf on the BQ. Weren't just feeding people, you were telling stories with food, and the cookbooks, when they existed, were half memory, half suggestion, and half divine inspiration. Some instructions included, stir until the angels approve. So now, you might ask, if a recipe can only be made through memory, patience, and prayer, was it food, or was it something closer to ritual? Feasts, fasts, and the impossible art of medieval meal planning. 1,750 words. Let us say you are now head cook in a small noble estate around the year 1400. The Lord Steward has just given you tomorrow's orders. A midday meal for 28 guests. The bishop is attending no meat on Fridays. One guest is allergic to leeks or claims to be the household is observing a local fast for St. Martha, meaning no dairy, but also someone has gifted the household a full suckling pig, which must not go to waste. You stand there with a lump of chalk in one hand and a prayer on your lips, because now it's time to build a menu that honors saints, avoids indigestion, and doesn't get you whipped by the steward. Fasting in the Middle Ages was serious business in a single calendar year. Over 130 days were set aside as fast days. These included Wednesdays and Fridays, Advent, the weeks before Christmas, Lent, the 40 days before Easter. Various saints' days and local feast cycles. Fasting didn't always mean eating nothing. It meant no meat from four-legged animals, no dairy, including cheese, eggs, butter, fish, grains, and vegetables only. This led to some fascinating food workarounds: almond milk instead of cow's milk, fish pies shaped like boars' heads, fried bread soaked in wine and honey, labeled bishop's custard to keep things festive. Some monasteries even developed mock meats, Satan-like wheat pastes flavored with herbs to mimic sausage or roast goose. The goal was obedience, not necessarily suffering. The social theater of a million wealthy households. Meals were performed. A typical feast might include 3 courses, each with 5 to 10 individual dishes, bread trenchers, used as plates and later thrown to the poor wine, diluted with water except for knights, who drank freely. A ceremonial hand-washing bowl passed around before and after eating. Music between courses, often provided by traveling minstrels or young pages with flutes. The cook's role: to time every dish perfectly to ensure there were no repeating colors or textures, to keep portions balanced between meat, pottage and sweet sour relishes, to hide the labor because noblemen were not meant to imagine the pounding, boiling, and burning it took to turn pheasant bones into creamy sauce. One 14th century noblewoman wrote in her journal, "I've never thought to see the kitchen. I believe it steams like the devil's bath." Measurement by memory. Here's a medieval unit of measurement for you: the size of a walnut, enough to fill a pigeon's egg; the weight of a shilling's worth of feathers until it tastes of pilgrimage. These weren't jokes, they were standard culinary phrases handed down from cook to cook. Apprentices learned them through observation and mouthfeel. A successful cook was not one who followed recipes precisely, but one who remembered how it looked the last time it went right, and when it went wrong. It was rarely blamed on the food. It was the cook, or the spice merchant, or bad humors in the air. Dishes that sound like spells from surviving. Dish names from this period: compost, a salad of stewed root vegetables with vinegar and sugar; blank manga, a sweet dish of rice, almond milk, chicken and sugar jam; of herbs, a green broth with leeks and parsley subtleties; sculpted sugar desserts shaped like castles, saints or birds; mortrues, ground meat and bread boiled into a thick paste; brewis, soaked bread in broth, often eaten by the sick or elderly. Most were eaten with the fingers only. The elite used knives. Forks were rare and considered decadent, even dangerous. One church official banned forks in 1100, declaring, "God gave us fingers, let that be sufficient." Prayer as time of piety as ingredient. We return now to the recipe that asked you to boil a goose for the length of a pater noster. Why? Because timekeeping was imprecise. Water clocks were unreliable. Hourglasses expensive. Sundials only useful in daylight. So the church became the metronome of the kitchen. The Lord's Prayer, 30 seconds. The Rosary, approximately 45 minutes. A full sermon, roughly 2 hours. One abbey kitchen had bells rung at regular intervals, not for prayer, but for turning the meat. Cooking, like everything else in medieval life, moved to the rhythm of the divine. So now, as the kitchen smoke curls and the mortar returns to the shelf, ask yourself, was medieval food just fuel for the body, or was it a way of making sense of time, belief, and the delicate balance between hunger and holiness? When dinner looked like a dragon and tasted like lentils, 1,750 words, the feast is about to begin. You wipe your hands on your apron and step back. The table is dressed with linen. Candles flicker. The floor has been swept twice. Somewhere, a lute is being tuned badly. And on the kitchen counter sits your greatest challenge of the day: a roast pig shaped like a griffin, a lentil stew meant to resemble quail eggs, a sugar swan painted with crushed violet petals, and a custard pie sealed with wax that must bleed fruit syrup when cut. This is not food. This is performance art. So tell ties. The medieval art of edible illusions. Subtleties, also spelled subtleties, were elaborate dishes designed to deceive or impress. They could be real animals disguised as mythical ones, sugar sculptures of saints, animals, or castles; pies that revealed live birds when opened; loaves that concealed a note or a relic; or dishes shaped to resemble something else entirely, like a fish molded from almond paste and painted silver. The word subtlety comes from the same root as subtle, and that was the point: to suggest wonder, surprise, a quiet gasp before the first bite. The cook as storyteller. These dishes often told stories. A nobleman's wedding feast might feature a sugar castle with the couple's initials carved into the battlement; spies with almond figurines of the bride and groom; may roast boar wearing a golden crown; custards flavored with herbs of joy, marjoram, mint, and rose. Religious feasts might include a depiction of Noah's Ark made with bread and salt dough; a tower of fish pies representing Jonah's whale; a stack of colored jellies shaped like angels; and coronation feasts. Well, at one English coronation in the 15th century, it's said the royal kitchen created a life-size sugar lion with a roaring mechanism; a gilded pudding shaped like the crown of Saint Edward; a custard so perfectly balanced it was described as a dish of the angels. If angels ate eggs, the hidden work behind the wonder creating these illusions took time. Sugar had to be boiled, pulled, cooled, and sculpted by hand. Edible paints were made from dried petals. Charcoal or powdered minerals. Gelatin came from boiled calves' feet. Strained and cooled for hours. Live birds used in singing pies had to be inserted after baking. Through a hinged crust, gold leaf had to be applied using honey or fish glue, one square at a time, and then after all that the dish might not even be eaten. Sometimes nobles simply admired the subtlety, clapped politely, and moved on to the trenches and ale. The point wasn't nourishment, the point was marvel. But what did it actually taste like? The truth is not always great. Sugar was often coarse, and gritty meats were sometimes overcooked from long roasting. Spices, used without restraint, could drown out the other flavors. Fish custards were exactly what they sound like, but medieval taste was not modern taste. What mattered was heat from pepper, ginger, or mustard. Complexity, sweet and sour together, like vinegar and honey. Symbolism, eggs for rebirth, boar for strength, fish for faith. Texture, the more textures in one dish, the more refined it was considered. And remember, this was before tomatoes, chilies, chocolate, corn, and potatoes arrived from the Americas. They worked with what they had and made the most of it. The forgotten cooks behind the curtains. Few names of medieval cooks survive. Most were servants, not authors, but they left behind hints of themselves. Burnt marks on the pages of La Vianda, smudges on parchment where fingers turned pages. Mid-recipe side notes in Latin like, "This one always burns if left too long, or better with more honey. But do not tell the steward." In one Italian recipe book, a cook wrote beside a fish pie, "The Lord's nephew asked for this again. May God help me." Even in anonymity, the cooks had voices, and through those voices, we glimpse a world where food wasn't just fuel, it was language, hierarchy, celebration, and labor all at once. So now, as the feast begins and the swan made of sugar glows under the candlelight, ask yourself, what would you serve if your guests believed food could tell a story and would judge you not only by the taste, but by the silence between each bite? The Renaissance Pope who hired a falconer for his pet geese of marble, and a bird named Francesco. The year is 1471. The city is Rome. The church is powerful, wealthy, and at times deeply odd. Sitting at the head of it all is Pope Sixtus IV. Born Francesco della Rovere, he is not a soldier pope like Julius II, nor a philosopher pope like Leo X, but he is a builder, a patron, and according to several whispers, a man who once commissioned a trained falconer, not for hawks, but to watch over his household. Geese. Yes, geese. PayPal, Manatri PayPal. Households were no stranger to exotic animals. Previous popes had kept a white elephant gifted from India, Persian cats with jeweled collars, monkeys dressed in one case, a lion that reportedly snored like a friar. But Sixtus IV's taste ran gentler. He preferred birds, and while pigeons were everywhere, and doves considered holy, he grew particularly fond of domesticated geese, large, honking, intelligent, and by PayPal standards relatively manageable. They roamed the Cortile del Belvedere, nibbled on spilled grain, and on more than one occasion disrupted theological debates by bursting into the PayPal library. Unannounced geese with names and jobs. According to household notes from the Archivio Segreto Vaticano, Sixtus had at least 5 geese hitched, named, each fed special seed cakes, and one of whom was said to respond to the name Francesco Piccolo, Little Francis. The geese were Francesco Piccolo, allegedly the favorite Vespa, known to nip at cardinals' robes. Bianca laid eggs in the Basilica Garden. Clementi walked only in clockwise circles. Lucretia disliked music, especially lute performances. They were not penned, they were staff, and because several incidents occurred involving lost feathers, startled guests, and a papal mitre that had to be dry cleaned, Sixtus took action. He hired a falconer. A falconer without falcons. His name was Raffaello da Gu, a trained handler of raptors, but when he arrived at the Vatican, he was assigned not hawks or eagles, but 5 blessed creatures of the Lord, of white feather and honking mouth. Raffaello's duties included guarding the geese from stray dogs and shivering. They didn't wander into the Sistine Chapel under construction, cleaning the marble where they nested on occasionally. Walking them through the cloisters at Donat is unclear if he saw this as a promotion or a punishment. One note, written in Raffaello's own hand and stored with the PayPal staff registers, reads, "They are stubborn, proud, and possibly more holy than I. Why geese? Why now? Geese in the Renaissance carried curious symbolism. In Roman history, geese had famously saved the capital by honking at night during a Gallic invasion. Their alertness became legendary. In Christian allegory, they represented watchfulness, pilgrimages, sometimes the voice of the Holy Spirit, particularly in Celtic traditions. Sixtus IV, ever fond of symbolism, may have seen his birds as a reminder of divine vigilance, a connection to ancient Rome, or more practically, a gentle comfort in a palace full of whispers and ambition. He often quoted nature in his homilies. He planted olive trees near the library. He dined simply when alone. It's possible that geese were not eccentricity but companionship. So now, as twilight settles on Vatican tiles and the geese settle in for the night, ask yourself, in a palace of marble and gold, was the most honest presence the one that waddled, honked, and reminded a pope to stay grounded? Goose diplomacy and feathers in the Basilica, 1750 words. Pope Sixtus IV is best remembered today for commissioning the Sistine Chapel, for strengthening papal authority, and for navigating a treacherous world of Renaissance politics. But within the inner courtyards of the Vatican, a different kind of diplomacy was quietly unfolding, feathered, fragrant, and not without its comic missteps, because while Rome was negotiating peace and power, it was also sweeping up goose droppings, near priceless frescoes. The morning routine each day. Just after Mattea's Raffaello de Gubbio would rise and begin his duties, inspect each goose for missing feathers, cracked talons, or signs of lice heat, a basin of rosemary-scented water, a papal directive for their daily blessing splash, scatter a mix of oats, raisins, and holy basil near the marble planters, whisper a quick Latin prayer. Not for divine intervention but for cooperation. Francesco Piccolo, the Pope's favorite, insisted on being fed by hand. Lucretia refused to eat until a bell rang. Vespa nipped ankles if food was late. By the time the Vatican staff filed in, the geese were clean, fed, and proudly strutting near the library steps like they owned the place. The incident with the cardinals' hats one spring afternoon. A diplomatic party arrived from Avignon. They brought with them gifts. Bottled rose oil manuscripts on mysticism, my small jeweled crucifix, and, unfortunately, bright red hats. Two geese. These crimson caps looked suspiciously like ripe fruit or territorial flags. Within moments, Clemente and Bianca had launched a feathered assault. One cardinal fled behind a statue of Saint Sebastian. Another dropped his hat and tried to bribe the geese with breadcrumbs. Pope Sixtus IV later apologized diplomatically but reportedly laughed until he had to sit down. Feathers in the Basilica. Despite Raffaello's best efforts, the geese did not remain outdoors. They occasionally wandered into the Basilica of St. Peter, especially during open-air services. One mass was famously interrupted when Vespa waddled down the aisle, honked once, and attempted to nest in a pile of altar cloths. The Swiss guard was summoned, but Sixtus, amused, simply remarked, "If the Lord has sent his messenger in feathered form, who am I to deny its sanctuary?" A compromise was reached. From then on, the geese were allowed inside the Basilica only on feast days, and only in the back rows. Raffaello built them a small wooden pen beneath a fresco of the Annunciation. It was, by all accounts, the most piously located poultry enclosure in Rome. Guests and gossip word of the geese spread. Visitors from Florence, Venice, and even Constantinople began requesting an audience not just with His Holiness, but with the birds of His Grace. Diplomatic letters included phrases like, "Please offer our respects to Francesco Piccolo, the honking one." Pilgrims sent seeds, prayer beads, and once rather awkwardly a taxidermy duck. Satirical poets in Rome composed verses like, "The geese of God guard holy holes. They hiss at pride and peck at foals." Some officials grew frustrated. One aide wrote in private correspondence, "The court spends more on saffron for the geese than parchment for the scribes." But Sixtus IV defended the cost. He believed, perhaps sincerely, that peaceful creatures reflected a peaceful papacy. Birds in a time of chaos. It's easy to laugh at the notion of papal geese, but remember, the Renaissance was a time of political violence, espionage, and plague. In the midst of all that, Sixtus created hospitals, libraries, aqueduct repairs, and yes, a sanctuary for 5 oddly pampered birds. He was not naive. He was strategic. The geese, some believed, were part public theater, part living metaphors, symbols of simplicity, memory, and watchfulness in a church often burdened with weightier concerns. Their presence softened the edges of papal authority, reminded visitors, whether bishop or baker, that holiness could arrive with wings and webbed feet, not just mitres and Latin. So now, as dusk settles over the colonnades and the birds settle into straw-filled baskets beneath holy frescoes, ask yourself, when power humbles itself enough to care for a goose, does that power grow smaller or infinitely larger? Marble, memory, and the quiet legacy of the papal birds. 1,750 words. By the late 1470s, Pope Sixtus IV had become a fixture in Roman political life, respected by some, feared by others, and still faithfully followed by 5 unruly geese and their patient handler Raffaello de Gubbio. But even amid rising tensions in Italy, the Pope's small avian companions continued to strut, squawk, and remind Rome that divinity didn't always speak Latin. That the last years of the papal geese's Sixtus aged. The geese aged to Vespa. The ankle biter developed a limp. Bianca laid fewer eggs. Francesco Piccolo became slower, but no less proud. Raffaello, still loyal, was promoted to custodian of living creatures within the Holy Court. An entirely invented title meant to grant him a stipend, a small apartment near the papal baths, and the authority to shoosh away overly curious pilgrims. The Vatican scribes began to record the geese's habits, how they responded to organ music, which saints' feast days they attended most faithfully, and which visiting dignitaries they approved of via honk frequency. Some reports, possibly embellished, suggest that the birds were even present during certain private papal audiences, standing quietly behind Sixtus as if forming a feathery conclave of their own. The Falconer's Journal, one of the most curious surviving sources on this chapter of papal history, is a slim parchment-bound volume, sometimes referred to as Il Diario del Falcon IERE. Though not a formal chronicle, it's believed to be Raffaello's personal account of his years in service. In it, he writes, Francesco Piccolo stood watch as the Pope read this morning. He blinked only twice. I believe he understands more than we give him credit for. And when the bells rang for the feast of Corpus Christi, Bianca honked in time. Lucretia remained unimpressed. The tone is humble, almost devotional. Raphael does not exaggerate his role, but in line after line. He makes it clear he loved those birds. Death and honking in the time of mourning in 1484. Pope Sixtus IV died. Rome fell briefly into political chaos. Riots broke out in some districts. Cardinals began maneuvering for the next conclave. And in the Vatican courtyard, 5 confused geese honked and wandered and refused their morning feed. Raffaello, according to legend, led them in a small procession around the Pope's tomb. There is no record of whether they understood, but then again, no one truly understands grief. The next Pope, Innocent VIII, was less enamored with geese. Within a few weeks, Raffaello was released from service, though granted a small pension. Birds were relocated to a monastery garden outside Rome. Some say they lived out their days in peace, pecking at figs and startling monks during Vespers. Francesco Piccolo, the favorite, reportedly died in the arms of an elderly friar, who said a prayer before placing a feather in his psalter. Memory in feathered form. What, then, do we make of it all? Was it just an eccentric pope indulging a whim, or was it something more? In a world ruled by marble hierarchy, incense and fear, a place where few things were gentle, Pope Sixtus IV made room for 5 awkward, noisy living reminders of the fragility of control, the humor of holiness, and the strange, quiet dignity of small creatures given a place to be seen. Years later, a stone relief was added to an unused corner of the Vatican gardens. It shows 5 birds in a linguist, unmistakably beneath the Latin phrase, Et Domini Memoria, non semper in sermoni sed etiam in silunio, and the memory of the Lord lives not only in words, but in silence. A last honk echoes through time today. Visitors to the Vatican will not find geese in the courtyard, but near a tucked-away fountain behind the Apostolic Palace, a faint carved goose feather remains weathered, cracked, and barely visible. Tourists rarely notice it, but those who do often smile, because perhaps what Pope Sixtus IV understood better than his rivals was this, that faith, like birds, cannot be caged for long. It must be fed, honored, and occasionally let loose to wander among the marbled halls as you drift towards sleep. Now, imagine that feathered procession one last time. A pope in white, a falconer in brown, and 5 plump geese waddling beneath frescoed ceilings, leaving small marks of joy where no one expected them. The Viking who discovered America then forgot to tell anyone. Section 1. Greenland's bored suns and the sea that looked like trouble. 1,750 words let U.S. set the scene. The year is roughly 1000 CE. You're standing on the coast of Greenland, which despite its name is not green at all. The wind smells of salt and seal fat. The ground crunches with frozen moss. You've eaten boiled fish for the 5th night in a row, and your father is loudly sharpening a whalebone comb while mumbling about your lack of ambition. Your name is Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, founder of the first Norse settlement in Greenland, and you are bored. Greenland. Marketing versus reality. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate how Leif got here. His father, Eric the Red, had been exiled from Iceland for murder, in true Viking fashion. He responded by sailing west and discovering Greenland. He named it Greenland not because it was green, but because, by his own admission, it sounded better for real estate sales. Men will be more easily persuaded to go there if the land has a good name. This strategy worked, kind of. A few hundred Norse settlers arrived. They built turf houses, herded sheep, tried to grow barley, and mostly talked about how much better Iceland had been. So by the time Leif came of age, Greenland was already what we might call a remote outpost with low Yelp reviews. A story half overheard now according to the saga of the Greenlanders. Leif's interest in sailing west didn't begin with a grand plan, it began with a rumor. A trader named Bjarni Herjolfsson had years earlier been blown off course during a storm and spotted strange lands to the west forest's hills, and no snow. But Bjarni, a practical man, made no landing. He went home. Leif, however, thought, wait, forests in Greenland, timber was gold. Settlers built with sod and stone because trees were virtually non-existent, so Leif proposed a voyage not to discover new worlds, but to collect what. He bought Bjarni's ship, assembled a crew, and sailed west. Vinland-bound Leif's journey took him to 3 places, each noted by the sagas: Helgeland, land of flat stones, likely Baffin Island; rocky, cold, uninspiring. Markland, land of forests, possibly Labrador, better, but no settlements; Vinland, land of wine, perhaps Newfoundland, where he found grapes, wild grain, and mild weather. There, Leif and his crew built houses, they gathered timber, they brewed fermented juice from native berries, and they didn't get frostbite on this. For a Greenlander was paradise. They stayed the winter, but then, nothing here's where things get strange. After returning to Greenland, Leif told his family, about Vinland. And then he did not go back. No royal charter, no colonization campaign, no church-sponsored voyages. He simply resumed life in Greenland, took over as chieftain after his father, and never again led an expedition west. Vinland faded from view. Was it really discovery? It's worth remembering that the land Leif visited was already inhabited, likely by ancestors of the Bathhouse or other First Nations peoples. Leif's voyage was likely unknown to much of Europe. No maps, treaties, or formal claims followed his landing. In essence, he discovered America, but not in a way that changed history at the time. It was quiet, unrecorded, almost casual. So now, as the Viking sails rest in their boathouses in the North Atlantic darkens with fog, ask yourself, what does it mean to find something if no one remembers to follow? A settlement that vanished, a story that wandered. 1,750 words. Let's pick up where we left off. Leif Erikson had found Vinland a place with trees, berries, and unfrozen ground. He stayed a season, returned to Greenland, and then did not return, but others did. Sort of. The sagas speak sort of. There are two major sources for Leif's journey. The saga of the Greenlanders, the saga of Eric the Red. Both were written over 200 years after the events, based on oral tradition and storytelling that do not agree. In one version, Leif is the heroic discoverer. In another, someone named Thorfinn Karlsefni leads the first attempted settlement. Still another mentions Leif's sister Freydis, who may have murdered several people with an axe. Yes, that happens. The details blur. What's clear is this. After Leif, several groups did attempt to return to Vinland. Thorfinn Karlsefni and the first Vinland colony. Thorfinn Karlsefni, an Icelandic trader and explorer, sailed to Vinland with 3 ships, about 160 people, including women, cattle, tools, and plants, to settle long-term. They built houses, planted crops, mapped rivers. But then they met the locals. The Skrillinga arrived. Norse sagas refer to indigenous people as Skrillinga, vague, often dismissive term. It's unclear which exact tribe the Norse encountered, likely the Beothuk or ancestors of Algonquian-speaking peoples. At first, trade was peaceful. The Norse offered red cloth and received pelts in return. But then came an argument. Some sagas say a bull frightened the locals. Others mention theft or misunderstandings over trade. Eventually conflict. Arrows flew, a Norseman was killed. The settlers retreated. Thorfinn concluded the land was rich, but too dangerous to settle. They packed up and left. Why didn't the Norse stay? Several reasons. Distance. Vinland was over 2,000 kilometers from Greenland. Conflict. The Norse were not equipped for sustained diplomacy or warfare with established local peoples. Isolation, no resupply routes, no communication with Iceland or Norway. Limited ambition. The Norse weren't empire builders like Rome or Spain. They wanted trade, timber, and livable land. And so, slowly, Vinland faded from Norse memory. Leif's brief visit became legend. Thorfinn's colony became a footnote. And by the mid-1100s, no one was sailing west anymore. The Lonzo Meadows site. Fast forward nearly 1,000 years. In 1960, archaeologists discovered something strange on the northern tip of Newfoundland. The remains of Norse-style sod houses, iron nails, a spindle whorl. This site, now called Lonzo Meadows, is the only confirmed Viking settlement in North America. It matches saga descriptions of Vinland almost perfectly. There's no sign of a full colony, no bodies, no forts, but it proves what many suspected. Leif Erikson really was here, and then he left. Legacy and silence. Leif Erikson died around 1020 CE, having never returned to Vinland. He passed on no maps, founded no town, claimed no title beyond Leif the Lucky. His descendants remained in Greenland for a few centuries until colder weather, isolation, and economic decline ended the colony altogether. By the 1400s, even the memory of Vinland was fading from Norse minds. So now, as the Atlantic winds rise and the sagas fall quiet, ask yourself, what makes a discovery matter the moment it's made, or the footsteps that follow after? What if the Vikings had stayed? 1,750 words. We left off with Leif Erikson gone from Vinland. His settlement short-lived and his people returned to Greenland. But now, with hindsight and curiosity, let us drift into a gentler form of speculation, not fiction, but thoughtful. What if, because history is full of almosts, Vinland in the shadows for centuries, the Norse kept no formal memory of Vinland? There were no preserved maps, no odes, no holy relics of the journey. By the time Columbus set sail in 1492, most of Europe had forgotten entirely that Norse sailors had reached North America nearly 500 years earlier. Columbus didn't read the sagas. He read Ptolemy and Marco Polo. The Norse weren't in the charts. Even when Icelandic scholars began copying the sagas in the 1300s and 1400s, Vinland remained a curiosity, a vague, faraway place, uncertain in location and meaning. It would take until the 20th century for modern archaeology to confirm it ever existed. Why did they leave so little behind? Part of the reason is simple. The Vikings were not imperialists. They didn't plant flags or build roads. They were seafarers, farmers, raiders, and traders. Their world was shaped by harsh climates, small settlements, or traditions. Above all, mobility of inland wasn't a conquest, it was an experiment. And when it didn't pay off, when the winters grew difficult or the locals grew angry, they left. Not with drama, not with speeches. Just quietly. What if they'd stayed? Historians and dreamers alike have asked, what if the Norse had founded permanent towns in North America? What if they had established trade with indigenous peoples? What if European contact had begun 500 years earlier and differently? Imagine a world where Norse and Algonquian traders learned each other's languages, Christian monks copied runes alongside native oral histories, Viking ships sailed down the Mississippi centuries before the Spanish arrived. It's tempting to romanticize, but also sobering because Norse Greenland itself collapsed by the 1400s. Climate change, isolation, and famine took their toll. Even if they had stayed in Vinland, they may have vanished just the same. Leaf in memory and myth, despite being largely forgotten in the Middle Ages. Leif Erikson was rediscovered in the 19th century during a wave of interest in Norse heritage. In 1874, a statue of Leif was unveiled in Boston. In 1925, the US government recognized Leif Erikson Day today. His name graces schools, streets, parks, and even spacecraft. He's become a kind of Nordic patron saint of what could have been. Not a conqueror, not a colonizer, but a quiet discoverer who made it to the New World and then went home for dinner. The quiet legacy, perhaps. The lesson of Leif is this: that discovery is not always loud, that footprints can matter even if they're washed away, that history sometimes waits centuries to notice what was always there somewhere in Newfoundland. The wind still rattles the grass around the ruins of a Norse house. No sign, no plaque. Just earth and sky, and a memory too stubborn to stay buried. So as you drift into sleep tonight, remember the strange, quiet man who found a continent and shrugged, who left no empire, but also no war, who left behind, instead, a story passed through firelight, across oceans, and into your ear. A story that almost didn't survive, but did.